Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the fanfiction guy. Back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Becomes Worst Nightmare? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. My alarm clock blared through the silence, startling me awake. I had been in a deep sleep, and I felt strange, like a stranger in my own body. I looked at my hands to reassure myself that I was me. As I surveyed my room, I struggled to remember the details from before I went to bed. Everything felt foggy and unfamiliar, yet somehow recognizable. What was going on with me? I shook my head, trying to clear the confusion. I had to get ready for school, so I pushed the feeling aside. I showered, dressed in my junior high uniform, and headed downstairs to meet my mom, who was preparing a quick breakfast before heading to work. My dad was already gone. I went shopping yesterday, so don't buy anything for lunch on your way to school, you hear me, she instructed. I waved her off, and she embraced me before grabbing her bag and keys, calling out, "Bye. I'll see you after school." Despite my efforts to shake off the strange feeling, I still felt a bit dazed. Everything that happened in that minute felt like both a second and an eternity. I inhaled some food without really thinking and gathered my things for lunch. With my bag and books in hand, I left for school. I hated school. It felt like everyone there was an idiot. Being at the top of my class wasn't hard, but it didn't change how I felt about the place. "Yo, Bakugo," I heard as I walked, already exhausted at the thought of enduring another day surrounded by my classmates. Tsubasa and Kai, two of my classmates, fell into step beside me. "That homework was crazy, right?" Tsubasa said, his finger extension quirk making him look even more foolish. "It was easy, you're just not very bright," I shot back and he laughed. "I'm with you, Bakugo," Kai chimed in, equally annoying. As they continued to chatter, something caught my attention. A huge crowd had gathered in front of the school, and it was eerily quiet. I wondered if the school hadn't been unlocked yet. But as I got closer, I saw people whispering to each other, tears streaming down their faces. Flashing lights from an ambulance and a fire truck illuminated the scene. I could hear radios crackling with instructions. What the hell happened? I muttered, pushing my way to the front. When I reached the caution tape, what I saw would haunt me forever. A large, black plastic covering was draped over something, and a dark liquid was seeping out from underneath. It was clear what it was, BLD whatever lay beneath the covering was a body, and the fact that it was covered instead of on a stretcher meant one thing. They were dead. An officer led our school principal toward the covered body. They lifted the plastic just enough for the principal to see underneath. When he nodded, confirming he recognized the victim, the officer lowered the covering. But not before I saw. Not before I realized who was under it. "He did it," Tsubasa whispered. "He actually did it." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "Mr. Bakugo." I barely heard the principal speaking to me, my mind fixated on the image burned into my memory. I felt hollow, as if everything inside me had been scraped out. I knew he was dead. I knew he had jumped from the school roof, tormented about being quirkless, desperate to be a hero. I knew it was my fault that Deku had taken his own life. But I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, I would surely be sick again. They called my parents to come pick me up, but I wouldn't talk to them either. I went straight to my room and shut the door, dropping my bag to the floor. What was happening? What had just occurred? In a moment of despair, I ripped at my clothes, letting out a sob filled with agony. Tears streamed down my cheeks, soaking them in seconds. I fell to my hands and knees, consumed by a single thought that drowned out everything else. What have you done? She didn't want me at Deku's funeral, his mom. I couldn't blame her. Still, I wished I could have gone. I wanted to apologize, though I knew it wouldn't help. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that anything I said would only deepen the wound. It was best to leave her alone. Whether anyone else blamed me or not, I didn't know or care. I blamed myself, and that was all that mattered. I still walked to school, sat through a year of monotonous classes, and turned in assignments, earning good grades. The only difference was the glaring void where Deku should have been. Every class had an empty chair, A constant reminder that he wasn't there, and worse, why. Getting into UA was a dream of mine, to be the world's greatest hero, even greater than All Might. But a dark shadow loomed over that dream, knowing I had caused someone's death. I thought that if I saved enough people, I could find forgiveness. So, I fought hard for that dream, however tainted it was. I strove every day to prove that I would be the best, the undeniable champion. Only then could I forgive myself for what had happened. I started my first year at UA in a class of aspiring heroes. While a few were as foolish as those at my junior high, I felt superior to them all. No one would claim a victory over me. 1 year turned into 2, then 3, each mundane. The hero course was exciting but served as another reminder of Deku. He wanted this, even if he could never have it due to being quirkless. I pushed those thoughts aside. I had to stay focused. Each day, it became easier to forget him, and I grew numb. If I was going to be the best, if I was going to save enough people to atone for my actions, I couldn't afford distractions. So, I stopped thinking about Deku. I stopped caring about everything. My only goal was to be the best, only that would fix it all. I graduated from UA and the Hero program and obtained my license. Step 1, complete. Now on to Step 2, sign with a good agency and fight my way to the top. Sure, I had to start as a sidekick, but I wouldn't be there long. As I moved through the city, I sensed a villain approaching. I turned to see a newcomer shooting towards me. It was little things like this that indicated a villain's level of experience. This guy was a rookie. A half-impact explosion at his feet brought him to his knees, begging for mercy. What a waste of my time. Diesel. I called to my sidekick charging onto the scene. Take care of this guy. Find out if he has accomplices. I doubt there'll be any more trouble than he is, but I want this mission tied up neatly. Sir, he replied, acknowledging my direction. Diesel worked hard and I appreciated him. Ground zero. My earpiece buzzed with urgency. I instinctively grabbed my head, trying to ease the sharp pain that shot through my brain. DMN it. I yelled back, how many times do I have to? I'm sorry, sir, he interrupted. We've got a situation on the south side of town. But I'm not sure how to explain. Just send me the location, I replied. I'll head south now. As I made my way there, I wondered what could be happening that he couldn't describe. He was usually clear and dependable, so his hesitation was strange and unsettling. Almost a decade had passed since I graduated from UA. I spent most of that time as a sidekick, building connections and saving money to start my own agency. The agency I initially signed with was run by an older, popular hero. As I climbed the ranks, I gained his trust. A couple of years ago, I told him I was going to start my own agency. Instead of being upset about losing one of his best, he just grinned and said it was about time. He even suggested some of his younger sidekicks transfer to my new agency, and things took off from there. Since then, I worked hard to improve my reputation as a pro hero. It took a lot of effort, especially in gaining fame. I was known for being rough around the edges and not much of a charmer, so I had to work HRD on the PR side. But as I proved my worth through my skills, even without the polished demeanor that many other heroes had, I began to gain favor in the public eye. I may not have been high in the rankings yet, but I was higher than a lot of other heroes my age. I'm approaching the scene, I said over the comms. What other intel do you have for me? It's mass chaos, sir, he replied. From what I can tell, there was a sort of gas release. Anyone within about 10 meters of it. Well, I landed just outside the area in question and could see what he meant by mass chaos. Most everyone was in a state of panic, running and screaming. Many were injured, some bleeding from their eyes or mouths, while others had patches of BLD on their clothes, slowly soaking into the fabric. I grabbed a nearby civilian, a woman whose arms were bleeding. What's going on? I demanded. What happened? I'm not sure, she cried. I had grabbed her forearms to force her attention on me, but as I gripped them, I noticed her skin starting to disintegrate. No, it was more like a sponge when you squeeze water out of it. Instead of water, there was more BLD. I looked back up at her, still babbling on. Did it not hurt? Was the adrenaline blocking the pain? It didn't seem like it. She appeared to just not feel. I was walking outside of that cafe, she went on, when this weird vapor started coming up from the floorboards inside. After a second, people started screaming and falling to the ground, convulsing. It was horrifying. When she started sobbing, I realized I had gotten as much information as I could. I let her go and started making my way to the cafe she had mentioned. When I stepped inside, I knew instantly what had terrified her. Within that corner cafe was a battlefield of corpses, each shriveled up to the bone, lying in their own personal pool of BLD, whatever that gas was. It seemed to force a person's entire volume of BLD from their pores until they were drained. 2 other heroes met me in the restaurant, each exclaiming their horror at the scene. They had brought their own sidekicks, but what was left for us to do? Other than taking the dead to the morgue, that is. But could we touch them? What if that gas was still active? Were we even safe standing there? I looked around, but the air appeared clear. It must not have been much to have only saturated the air for a short PRD. But the casualties, how could it have resulted in this many deaths if it was only a small amount of gas? We shouldn't stay here, the hero on my right, Tsukuyami, stated. We can't just leave them, the hero on my left said. She was new, probably a sidekick. I hadn't met her before. We'll do no one any good if we're dead, I said quietly. Tsukuyami's right. We need to clear out and close off this area to civilians. We should call in a hazmat team and medics. There may be some that are still alive in here. I wasn't hopeful, but it seemed to appease the newbie. I walked out of the cafe and took in the situation outside. Things had settled down considerably since the new hero teams had arrived. A dozen or so sidekicks dotted the area, doing their best to see to injuries. I wasn't sure what they thought they could do. I wasn't even positive if the sponge-like behavior was classified as an injury. But their words of comfort went further than any medical expertise they could have offered. When the police arrived and barricaded the area, they called in a variety of different teams. Hazmat showed up, soon followed by forensics, detectives, and even a handful of scientists. The entire block was cordoned off, most dedicated to the crime scene while the rest was occupied by first aid. They kept me and the other heroes there in case we had a reaction since we were on scene first. But we were released after an hour when they decided we were out of the woods. But I wasn't ready to leave. I had questions and wanted answers. What did you find? I asked, walking up to the head detective. He turned his attention to me and then scrunched up his face. He had an answer, but I got the feeling he didn't want to share it. Well, it could be anything, he started vaguely, but it's safe to say that it was some form of chemical warfare. I rolled my eyes. Obviously. Do you have any leads? I asked more directly. Is there a device? Where did it come from? Any clues left behind? The detective hesitated, vacillating between telling me the truth or brushing me off again. I figured my being a newer pro was what made him shy in giving details. But I refused to stand down. My determination seemed to wear him down until he finally exhaled. So far, he started, defeated, we haven't found anything. The hazmat and forensics teams went into the building and have been searching for some time. They've come up with nothing. No prints, I replied, shocked. No device. No kicked up dust. Nothing, the detective repeated, shaking his head. Whoever set this off. They came in, set it off, and left without a trace. We have nothing to go off of as of now. My heart raced. Was I anxious? Or maybe excited? There was a challenge here, one I had never experienced before, and that pumped me up. I'm going to be on this investigation, I informed the detective. I'm getting to the bottom of this, understand? The detective was speechless at my bold demand, but I was in this for the long haul, and no one could do a thing about it. But it was frustrating. Weeks passed before we turned up anything, and what we found didn't even seem to tie directly to the attack on the cafe. We wanted it to, so we felt like we were making progress, but there was no obvious connection. Whoever set off the chemical weapon in the cafe was clean. They left us with not just nothing helpful but plenty of distractions that had us running in circles. Most of our time was spent deciding whether a clue we had found was real or just another red herring. We were desperate for anything. That's why the second event sparked a little hope. In the middle of the night, I was called to our base of operations. Standing around a metal table were me, the head detective Tetsuro, 2 officers, and another hero, Lemillion. They brought you on. I said to him begrudgingly. I would have thought this wasn't high profile enough for you. Lemillion smiled. I disliked him, not because he was bad, but because he was so good. His genuine smile and good nature were annoying, especially since he was my primary competition. Deep down, I knew I hated him because he reminded me of Deku. I had worked hard to suppress the guilt and pain of his death, and his presence dug it all up. Every problem in this country is high profile, my friend, he replied. I heard about what happened, but I had every confidence that the heroes involved were taking care of it. I'm here because someone thought my skill set would be an asset to this team. I'm excited to see that they've got you here too. I thought, stuff it. Lemillion was young, only a couple of years older than me, but he was considered the next All Might. His power of permeation seemed useless until you grouped it with whatever energy he had in the morning. The guy had unbelievable power, and his quirk felt like just a helpful tool he kept in his back pocket. What made him the favorite was his insane power set and his overwhelming optimism. A deep grunt alerted us to establish our attention to the detective at the end of the table. He took a deep breath before beginning. We've had some interesting occurrences over the last 2 days, Tetsuro started. Several emergency calls have been made from various locations within the city. Calls like what? I asked. Burns, he answered. Bad ones. He paused, as if that was supposed to mean anything to me. So, I retorted. Dispatch gets calls to burn victims all the time. Seems more like a fire department problem than a hero problem. Every problem is a hero's. I'm gonna stop you there, Casper, I said, cutting off Lemillion. I'm not here to argue the definition of altruism with you. I'm being realistic. Heroes handle what emergency responders can't. So, what makes these cases so special that they get to wake me up at 2 in the morning? I knew I didn't have many fans, particularly in the police force. I was a no-nonsense kind of guy. They knew I wasn't big on wasting time or sweet-talking victims. I got the job done. Helping them process the trauma was what therapists were for, not me. All of them were burned on their hands, the detective answered, and in every case, none were exposed to any kind of fire. No fire, Lemillion repeated. Could these have been hot water burns? From what the reports say, Tetsuro continued, they appeared to be more acidic. Chemical burns. There was the reason we were there. You think there's a connection between these chemical burns and the chemical weapon used 2 months ago, I said. Am I right? We can't confirm anything, he replied. We have zero evidence connecting the first incident to these. But the fact that several people have been targeted in a short period of time using some sort of chemical weapon makes us suspicious that they could be tied together. Do we know the source? Lemillion asked. Up until now, one of the officers contributed, the only thing connecting the victims was this area. She pointed to a portion of a map laid out on the table, circled in red. It's so. I trailed off. Unassuming, Lemillion finished. I nodded. The area circled was just a random shopping complex. No connection whatsoever to the cafe of the first attack. They weren't kidding when they said they had nothing tying the 2 events together. Unless, do we have someone investigating the area? I asked. We do, Tetsuro affirmed. We roped off the area in hopes of limiting any more interaction between civilians and wherever these burns are happening. But you said that the calls were random. To people's homes or adjacent streets, Lemillion added. That's true, he replied, but when the 4th or 5th call was received for a similar burn type and site, I started to think it was too much to call it a coincidence. We began making house calls to the victims to hopefully gather more information. At first, everything they said seemed irrelevant, but then we started asking the right questions. Initially, I thought it was a common agent causing the burns, like a cleaning product or detergent. But after realizing it was instead a common location, we made significant progress in the case. That's when it occurred to me that this may be connected to the first incident in the cafe. It seems a stretch, but I have a gut feeling that something more is happening here. I agree. The silence that followed my statement felt a little insulting. Were they really so surprised that I would agree with them? Sure, I was known for arguing over details, but that was only when the details didn't make sense. We went into this investigation thinking that the gas in the cafe was an act of warfare, I continued. Someone was using those people and their deaths to make a statement. Now I'm thinking we were wrong. I think Tetsuro is onto something. These two events are linked. It wouldn't make sense that the two victim populations are totally random, but I think that's a crucial detail. A chemical weapon was used in both situations on small groups of people, but not as an act of violence. As what then? Lemillion asked. Experimentation. My answer produced silence, but not of confusion or shock like before. They were processing the plausibility of the theory. What doesn't make sense to me, one of the officers remarked, is that the first incident was so big in public. It got a lot of attention. But this time, it's the opposite. If this villain is just experimenting, then why would they draw so much attention to themselves the first time, but not the second? It could have been overconfidence the first time, Lemillion answered. They were self-assured in their ability to stay off our radar, so getting caught just wasn't a risk. When they got that attention, they made sure to keep things quieter the second time around. They're intelligent, I muttered. They knew the gas would likely draw attention, so they took precautions to avoid getting caught. They were careful to put things in place to confuse and mislead us before even releasing the gas. They weren't surprised by the attention, they were prepared for it. And they aren't looking for it either, as proven by the second event. Attention or not, it doesn't matter. They were set on executing their plan. So, Tetsuro chimed in, not necessarily overconfident, but more of a meticulous planner. Detail-oriented. Detail-obsessed, I corrected. Overanalyzing to the point of predicting every possible outcome to prepare for it. Silence again. But this time, it was because no one wanted to be the first to admit that this characteristic was possibly the most dangerous among villains. It's one thing to fight against someone consumed with rage or revenge, but when you have someone whose motives are a mystery and who calculates every detail without engaging with us. This is bad, I muttered. I agree, Lemillion admitted. They clearly have some kind of endgame in mind, but I'm afraid it's much more sinister than what we're used to dealing with. It's true, Tetsuro said. This is dangerous. But we can't get caught up in the what-ifs. I called you in to discuss not only the more recent details but what to do about it. You've got a plan? I asked, probably with more skepticism than he appreciated. Yes, he replied, indicating the red circle on the map in front of us. Our questioning led us to where we think the common location of the chemical transmission was. It's a public drinking fountain. A detail the first chemical used at the cafe, which we'll call Agent A, shared with the second chemical, Agent B, is that the half-life is short. It didn't continue affecting people for longer than about 20 minutes. Something else to note is that it's not a timed reaction between the fluid or gas and what it comes in contact with. It has to be applied or released mechanically. Which means, our guy has to show up at the scene, I finished. Exactly, he affirmed. We got these from the tapes the cafe and a store adjacent to the water fountain had. Tetsuro put down 2 photos, freeze frames from some security footage. They weren't incredibly clear, but you could make out an individual in each picture. Each figure was about 6 feet tall, give or take, with a muscular build. Both wore dark-colored, hooded jackets covering most of their faces, glasses, and typical surgical masks. With nothing about their appearance being distinctive, there was no way for us to tell if it was the same person. I whispered, intelligent. Tetsuro's plan wasn't really a plan. Our job as heroes was to keep our eyes peeled while he and his team did the digging. We shared the photos with every agency in our jurisdiction, hoping someone would see something. Super helpful. But while we were looking, Tetsuro's team and affiliates continued their research. They were dissecting what little remained of the chemical from the drinking fountain. There were some similarities between Agent A and Agent B, but several differences too, further confirming my theory of experimentation. But what was he trying to create? What was his goal? More time went by with nothing. I could appreciate this guy's ability to stay underground without so much as a whisper of his existence, but he had to come up for air eventually, right? It felt like we were right back where we started, chasing our tails. Other than the security photos and scraps of leftover chemical agents, we turned up nothing. Sure, we found tons of people who matched the basic description of the villain we were dealing with, but nothing ever came of it. Dead ends all over the place. It was like playing chess without being able to see any of your opponent's pieces, just hoping that whatever move you made got you closer to their king. At first, I questioned why they included Lumillion on the case. What could he do? He had 2 eyes and 2 ears like the rest of us. It's not like he could bring in any more information than I could. But then I started to wonder if they brought him on purely for his optimism. We're bound to turn something up, he would say. I can feel it. We're getting closer to the answer. With every day that passes, our odds of finding something increase. Disgusting. Optimism alone was annoying, but optimism without anything to back it up was worse. Deku was optimistic, but he was also reasonable. Mostly. I angrily snatched a bottle of sauce off the supermarket shelf. What was wrong with me? For years, I had been able to remove myself from that nightmare. Why was I suddenly having a hard time keeping it together? In my frustration, I forcefully threw the bottle of sauce into my basket, causing it to break. I swore a little too loudly, making a mother gasp and rush her child out of the aisle. I put my basket on the ground and started looking for a worker who could help me clean up my mess. After walking down a few aisles, I gave up looking and grabbed a package of paper towels to do it myself. I'd just pay for them before I left. But as I passed by the cashier on my way back to the splattered sauce, I saw something that made my heart stop. A shock of messy, green hair. When my brain finally comprehended what I saw, I whipped around to face the checkout line, but that familiar shade of green had disappeared. Without thinking, I sprinted towards the door, desperately trying to see it again. My eyes darted around the busy crowd of people in front of me, but I came up empty. It wasn't until the store clerk shouted behind me that I realized how foolish I was. "Sir," he yelled nervously, "you have to pay for that." Yeah, I shot back. The man flinched at the venom in my voice, despite it not being meant for him. I turned back towards the store and made eye contact with the worker, whose eyes widened in recognition. "Ground Zero. I didn't realize. I sincerely apologize," he stuttered, bowing repeatedly in remorse. "Don't worry about it," I growled, walking past him. I was seriously losing it, I thought. Deku had been gone for over a decade. What possessed me to think that it was his mop of hair that I saw? And even if it was, why would I run after him? He would be the last person I would want to talk to after so long. After tearing open the package of paper towels, I started cleaning up my mess, not even paying attention to whether I got it all or not. My mind felt so scattered. I just wanted to go back to the bare apartment that I called home. I abandoned my grocery shopping, deciding I'd just come again tomorrow, put my head down, and started walking. Eventually, we got a break in the case, but it wasn't one any of us wanted. 3 heroes went missing overnight. Tetsuro filled us in. Overnight? I said in disbelief. How the hell did someone kidnap 3 pros overnight? Are we sure they didn't just? Lumillion trailed off. What? Tetsuro snapped. Go on vacation? Evaporate? Kill themselves? I flinched. Tetsuro, thinking my reaction was due to his sudden personality change, apologized and continued with his debrief, which was depressingly short. They really had disappeared without a trace. No one had even noticed their disappearance until they didn't show up for work. But I was more frustrated with the fact that there wasn't even a clear connection to this and the 2 previous events. No chemicals were discovered, Tetsuro relayed. No footage or witnesses to consult. The only thing that could possibly prove a connection is its random nature. Random timing, random people, random locations. Which heroes? Lumillion asked. Have we contacted their families? The more well-known of the 3 is MT Lady, Tetsuro began. Not a surprise, I thought. She's popular but not super smart. She tends to win her fights with power, not strategy. So if he got the jump on her, it would be easy to take her down if she didn't have a chance to use her quirk. Then a young girl who is a sidekick, actually. Goes by Uravity. I choked on my breath. Why her? She was just a sidekick, no one special in the hero world. What did this guy want from her? Her name was Achiko Uraraka. We were in the hero course together at UA. Our friend groups didn't really overlap, so I didn't know much about her until our first sports festival when we fought head-to-head. She was a sideline type without any real motivation to be the center of attention. That's why I had never really seen her as a threat, or even really noticed her at all. Despite the outcome, she didn't appear weak to me moving forward. I had mad respect for her after that fight. We became unlikely friends. It's not like we talked a whole lot, but when we did, it was easy. I had no problem bossing everyone else around, but not her. Though I never admitted it to anyone, she perfectly made up for whatever deficits I had when it came to hero work. We made a good team. Learning that she had been kidnapped made me more upset than anything had before. I was fuming. I hated this guy. I wanted him stopped. Sure, there wasn't an official connection, but I just knew. I could feel it in my gut. Our guy was involved in this. He was the mastermind behind these kidnappings, and it was driving me insane. The third is a teacher at UA, he finished. Shota Aizawa. Hero name Eraserhead. All of a sudden, my anger rushed out of me, and both mine and Lemillion's heads shot up, completely shocked. What? He gasped. How is that possible? Even if he didn't have a chance to erase their quirk, his hand-to-hand combat is nearly unmatched. I'm not familiar with him, Tetsuro admitted. That's because he's not big on being in the spotlight, I explained. But I agree with him. Eraser's not ranked very high in the charts, but that doesn't mean anything. He's good. And if someone managed to break into UA and escape with Aizawa in tow, then we're in deeper trouble than any of us could possibly imagine. Well, it goes without saying, Tetsuro said with a defeated sigh, but we've got our work cut out for us on this one. And if I'm being honest, I'm not really sure where to go from here. I could feel a heavy depression settle over him. Understandable, considering the months of effort he'd put into figuring out this mystery villain and turning up next to nothing. It was easy to feel at a loss. Hell, I felt it too sometimes. And, despite putting on that annoyingly positive facade, I knew Lemillion had to be feeling it too right about now. Things really had gone to CRP when I had to be the force of positivity in the group. Look, I grunted, we're going to figure it out. This guy can't keep going forever without missing a step at some point. He may be good, but he's not perfect. He can't be. It's just not possible. And this was why no one left pep talk duty to me. I was losing sleep over this case. So much so that Zero to Hero could have convinced me that maybe he wasn't so annoying after all. My brain couldn't figure out how someone could come up with not one but 3 crimes and execute them so cleanly. I hated to admit it, but it was grossly apparent that this guy was a criminal genius. I prided myself on my ability to think ahead, to analyze a villain's moves before they made them. I was pretty good at it. It's one of the things that made me such a hot pick for successful up-and-coming heroes. The fact that someone outsmarting me could so easily make my confidence wane was unsettling. I didn't just hate this guy, I was also kind of scared of him. What was I saying? I was dead set on being number one. And number one never shows their fear. If they have anything to fear to begin with. Which I didn't. I was afraid of nothing. As if they were just waiting for the opportunity to ruin my day, flashes of Deku's face flew through my mind. Moments from when we were kids, running through the creek, trying to catch bugs in our nets, running around in my backyard, or watching random videos of All Might. Then flashes of our fights, me trying to make him look as foolish as I could. Some flashes were of us talking. In those moments when I wasn't being a total JRK and actually turning to him when I needed support. And him always being there. Despite everything I said and did, he was always there, hand outstretched to help me back up. And then a final flash, the beginning of the end. Me yelling at him about how useless he was, quirkless and pathetic, trying my best to squash every one of his hopes and dreams. Then my vision was completely overwhelmed with that living nightmare. I was suddenly there, just outside the school, watching everything like it was happening for the first time. Walking through the crowd of students, seeing the red and blue lights flashing, taking in the black plastic covering and realizing. Stop. thought to myself. But it was too late. I was in too deep. The memories fell from their neatly folded pile in the corner of the highest shelf within the darkest closet. They fell all over the floor while I stood there, arms wide, trying desperately to keep them from falling. Devastated. All that work I had put into forgetting, trashed. I wasn't even sure where I was when this all hit me. But I rushed to get away from other people before the tears started to pour. No one could see me like this. No one could ever see me cry. No one ever had. No one, that is, except Deku. In the shadows of an alleyway dumpster, I stood trembling in emotional agony. Clenching my clothes in a fist above my heart, I cried, grieving in self-inflicted silence. "You're reporting to a corner store owned by an elderly lady." Cypher started briefing me on our newest call for a hero assist. So far, it sounded beneath me. Old ladies generally didn't like me. They said I was rude and impatient. Like I cared. "What's her deal?" I shouted while making my way to the scene. "Probably got her cat stuck in a tree or can't find the glasses that are on top of her head. Something spilled in her shop." I stopped moving. "Are you kidding me right now?" Someone thought that calling a hero was the best idea. "Call a janitor and quit wasting my time." "I'm not doing that," I replied to my earpiece. "Call dispatch back and tell them they are all certified morons." "Come on, ground zero," Cypher groaned. "You want to be number one, right? The smaller cries for help are the ones that really matter. You don't need bigger and grander rescues, you need votes. And you get more votes if you interact with more civilians. And yes, that includes paranoid little old ladies." I growled and let off a few explosions in my palms to work off my frustration. He was right. And I hated that. "Fine." Cypher showered me with compliments for my display of true altruism while I continued on to the shop. I didn't stop him. I kind of needed the self-esteem boost. When I walked in, I noticed that someone had taken it upon themselves to set up a budget crime scene. Customers were kept from going within several meters of the spill. The area where the so-called crime occurred was roped off with bright green gift wrap ribbon tied to various grocery items at each end of the aisle. It wasn't very effective, as I saw a few shoppers duck under the barrier to grab something off the shelves within the off-limit space. I rolled my eyes. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," the shaky voice of an elderly woman proclaimed above the dull ambience of the store. "My store has been attacked." "Ma'am," I started, trying my best to remain patient and respectful. "Why don't you tell me what happened?" "Well," the woman began, tightly clenching her apron. "It started off as a normal day. Here we go." I settled in for a long explanation full of meaningless details. But as I started to zone out, I began to notice things. Like her white knuckles, the nervous shuffling of her feet, her quick breaths, and the constant darting of her eyes. This woman wasn't paranoid, she was terrified. So much that I couldn't help but feel a bit of compassion for her. But then I noticed a man come in with a bag over his shoulder full of items. It wasn't abnormal, people always come in with items if they've already been to another store. What did the man look like? I interrupted, my patience running low. Her squeaky voice was grating my nerves. Did he do anything weird? He was about your height and build, and maybe close to your age too, she answered. I didn't notice much else to distinguish him from others. He was very plain looking. He wore a hat and a mask as well as glasses with a glare to them, so I never saw his eyes. If this old lady didn't have my full attention before, she did now. Hat and glasses. A mask. Plain looking. Without realizing, I had grabbed her shoulders, squeezing them tightly as if I were worried she would suddenly float away. What else? I burst, making her jump. Did you notice his hair? The clothes he wore? Any tattoos or piercings? Anything? She only shook her head, the terror in her eyes growing. I realized with a sharp inhale that I was likely scaring her more. I relaxed my grip and tried to make it a more comforting gesture. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice shaking. All I know is that he walked up and down each aisle several times. After he'd been back and forth a couple times, I started to notice his behavior more. He would walk down an aisle like he was looking for something, but he never took anything from the shelves. He would bend down for a while before standing up and moving on. The only reason I noticed the glare on his glasses was because, just before he walked out, he came up to me at the register and handed me this. She opened her left hand, exposing a small device that she had been gripping during our whole conversation. I took it from her palm and began looking at it closer, but it was pretty plain. A small device with a button large enough for someone to push it down with their thumb. After turning it over a few times in my hands, I decided to pocket it until I could hand it over to Tetsuro's team. I got the nagging feeling that they might be interested in it. Did he say anything? I asked, surprisingly calm. She nodded, glad to have some useful information. Oh yes, she replied nervously. He leaned in close to me and pointed to the clock on the wall next to me. And he told me that at the top of the hour, I needed to press that button. She pointed to the device she had given me, and he would watch to make sure that I did. Then he warned me not to say anything about it to anyone, and if I didn't follow all of his instructions, he would return and destroy my store with me inside. The look in this woman's eyes confirmed that she had indeed been threatened. And for what? To push a button. I assume you did what he said, I commented while she worked to steady her breathing. When she nodded, I asked, so what happened when you did? Well, I didn't know what would happen. I sat behind the register until the clock chimed, closed my eyes, and pressed the button. For an older woman, I had to admit she had guts. Who's to say that pressing the button wouldn't have triggered something dangerous? I was starting to have some respect for this little granny. Once I did, I heard faint sounds, she continued. Maybe whirring or like the sounds the inside of a grandfather clock makes. After a few seconds of that, I finally heard a crash and thought it was the beginning of the end. Even though my customers went to look for whatever had broken, I just sat there frozen for a moment longer. And when I thought maybe it was over, I got up to investigate the source of the crash. That's when I found the spill in that aisle. She pointed to the makeshift crime scene, and I decided I'd better take a look. But what I saw just didn't add up to the intensity of the story. Was she just milking it for attention? What was her angle? Or maybe more importantly, what was the guy's angle? She followed me as she kept talking. I squatted by the spill, trying to find anything abnormal. I finally noticed something strange in the middle of her explanation. As I got closer, she pressed on, I decided that whatever the broken item and spilled liquid were, it wasn't something I sold in my store. And more than that, it had been attached to a string which, if you follow it, connects to a sort of contraption that goes throughout the entire store. If I wasn't so terrified, I might have been impressed. I followed it as she said and saw what she was talking about. But where she was impressed, I was just becoming more and more angry. There were uncanny similarities between this contraption and the one that distributed the harmful chemical. I couldn't prove it yet, but I just knew this was our guy. And for the first time in this entire case, he had made contact with a civilian. And that annoyed me. Get these people out of here, I demanded, standing and digging through my pockets for my phone. I'm locking this place down until I figure out what happened. After dialing, I put my phone to my ear and listened impatiently to the ringing on the other end. When he finally picked up, I didn't even wait for him to speak. Tetsuro, I think I've got something. Get over here and bring hazmat. At this point, I was shocked that I hadn't given in to my frustration. I had broken several things. The skills I learned in my anger management class were becoming useless as my irritation grew. It was everything I could do to not crush the phone in my hand while talking to the detective. I'm sure you're disappointed, he said. I scoffed. Yeah, no kidding. He had just sent me the files concerning the recent incident at the old ladies' corner store. I was so sure. Tetsuro had raised an eyebrow, and a lot of the officers working on our now many months-long case laughed at me. Anger management class helped in that situation. They kept their limbs. I had poured through the documents and toxicology results from that case, and nothing connected it to our suspect. I mean, aside from the fact that the criminal's aesthetic matched our guy, but otherwise. The substance on the floor. Jewelry cleaner. According to the official ruling on this case, it was deemed an act of property defacement, probably by some misguided individual hoping to cause a scene. Open and shut case. Not really worth anyone's time. But my gut just kept pushing me to keep digging. Will you send me the crime scene photos? I asked, surprisingly calm, and any surveillance footage you have. I understand your desperation, Ground Zero, I really do. That's not what this is about. I shouted into the phone, no longer calm. Those extras didn't do enough. There is nothing in these reports about the footage or the photos, so how is anyone supposed to know that they even looked at it? Okay, Tetsuro exclaimed to appease me. I'll send it to you now. Do what you like with it, but I don't know how willing anyone will be to reopen this case. But you can let me know if you find anything new. We had that conversation over an hour ago. When the evidence showed up in my inbox, I abandoned my food and opened the attachments to start looking over it. My eyes were now tired and burning from staring at my computer screen for so long, straining to see every detail of each piece of evidence. I wouldn't admit it, but I was exhausted. And after watching the same clip of footage for what felt like an eternity, I was pretty close to giving it up and going to bed. I replayed the footage again, but my focus was elsewhere. I found myself amusingly moving the cursor back and forth on the screen, laughing at my own silliness. My chin, resting in my palm, was drifting closer to the desk. What the? I finally put the cursor to use, rewinding the footage to search for something specific. After watching the same video repeatedly, I felt like I had memorized every customer's movements, including an elderly woman's. One man stood in front of the instant ramen for ages, debating flavors before ultimately choosing yakisoba. Another woman, dressed in loud clothing, came in for a single bottle of bleach and left without paying. A mother struggled to keep her 3 children from causing chaos. The man in question followed the store owner's description closely before leaving. I noticed him create a pop-up contraption and connect it to a tripwire, which he handed over to the woman. His demeanor shifted when he threatened her, her face going pale. She didn't move until the contraption was triggered, causing a bottle of jewelry cleaner to shatter on the floor. It felt like I was stuck in a time loop, convinced I had memorized every detail of the footage until I zoned out while making spirals on my screen. I couldn't believe I had missed a crucial detail. The old lady mentioned in her statement that the man had crossed the street to watch her, but from her position, she wouldn't have seen where he went. We thought he wanted to ensure she obeyed his orders, but what if he didn't care? He could have pressed the button himself. Why threaten the store owner? What was his endgame? These questions crowded my mind, lulling me into a stupor until one small detail clicked into place. I texted Tetsuro with a timestamp from the footage. Get someone to sharpen the image at this timestamp. I want to see what he's holding. Tetsuro, clearly invested in the case, responded almost immediately on it. How did they miss that? Tetsuro and I leaned over the computer screen, zoomed in on the now clear image. They probably did what I did for the first hour I watched this footage, I suggested. Stopped paying attention after the guy walked out. I never would have guessed he'd reappear like that. The man left the store but took an immediate right outside, passing a large window on the north side. From the old lady's vantage point behind the register, she wouldn't have seen him walk by, but the security camera had a clear shot. Though we couldn't glean more details about his appearance, it was evident he was the villain we had been trying to find. Initially, I thought he was just a random civilian cleaning the windows. But as I aimlessly circled my cursor around him, I realized he wasn't washing the window at all, he was writing on it. I rewound the footage multiple times to watch him take out a thick paint pen and write in the bottom corner of the window. After he finished, I sent the timestamp to Tetsuro, who had one of his guys enhance the image so we could read it. Below the message was a set of coordinates. It never gets old, I whispered. What doesn't? Tetsuro asked, still glued to the screen in disbelief. I straightened, crossing my arms. Being right, I replied with a smirk, sensing the officers in the room bristle at my statement. It was likely one of them had written this case off. Begs the question, Tetsuro said, ignoring my comment. Ready for what? What does that mean? Well, for one, I replied, hands on my hips, it means he knows we're watching him. What he did in the store was flashy and drew enough attention, completely different from anything he did before. He intentionally rigged the store to get our attention. He wanted us to see him. So this message is for us, he replied. Now we have to ask ourselves, is this a trap? It's definitely a trap. He's literally telling us where he is, I said, rolling my eyes. It's likely the 3 heroes who went missing will be there. I'm sure you're right, he muttered. But do we fall for it? Do we send a team in, knowing that he's waiting for us there? Knowing full well that we would be at his mercy? We shouldn't just jump in without any idea of what we're getting into, I said. We have coordinates, which means we can scout out the area before going in. We'll figure out what we can from that and form a plan around the information we have. But we start with the coordinates. Tetsuro was staring off into the void. I wasn't sure how much he heard me, but I knew what he was thinking. Hey, I said, waving my hand in front of his face to get his attention. He jumped a little and then looked up at me. You did good, I said softly. Seriously, Tetsuro. We wouldn't have gotten this far without you. So don't let yourself get down. This is a huge step in the right direction. He nodded, still dazed, but I was confident he was ready to push forward. I stood there for a minute before heading for the door. I waved my hand without looking back. Let me know what you find, I said as I left. Once we have a better idea of what we're heading into, I'll get a team together to storm the place. We'll get our people back and take down the one who's made our lives hell. I looked out of the open hatch and glared down at the scene beneath me. A valley full of evergreens, the whole place covered in snow, and in the center stood an unassuming building. It appeared to have only one floor with little square footage. Built from cement and riddled with aluminum piping, it resembled a small factory or an unused supply warehouse. But as modest as the place seemed above ground, the levels beneath it were much more telling. This was a bunker. 3 planes were flying to the coordinates given, housing a sizable team of about 20 heroes among them. After a month of investigating the area and its surroundings, utilizing infrared tech to get a feel for the bunker's layout, and formulating our strategy, we were finally making our move. 30 seconds to the drop zone. Roger, I responded to our pilot. Squad A is a go. The 2 other squads signaled their readiness, marking the start of our mission. I was the first to jump from the plane, followed by the rest of my squad, then the others. The cement foundation extending from the north side of the building was our makeshift landing pad. I released my chute a little late, making my impact less than graceful. I had been distracted thinking about the plan. Get it together, Katsuki. Now is not the time to lose focus. Once I confirmed that all 3 squads had made it to the ground safely, I removed my parachute pack and moved on to our point of entry. I adjusted my earpiece, making sure it was secure. Then I restrapped my gloves and triple-checked that my gear was ready to go. We were ready for this. I was ready for this. I see 4 in total, Therma said, whispering over my shoulder. Her quirk allowed her to visualize the spectrum of heat coming off of anything, a sort of thermal imaging. She was handy when it came to locating people, weapons, and even chemicals. There are 3 grouped together, she continued, describing what we hoped were our stolen heroes. They appear to be held in separate rooms. But they're alive. That's a relief, I heard Lumillion mutter to himself. Only 4. I exclaimed. This place is huge and there are only 4 people. Assuming 3 of them are our victims, he doesn't have any backup. She shook her head, suddenly nervous. Check again, I snapped. Widen your range, whatever you need to do. There's no way he would be alone here, especially since he knew we were coming. For being so intelligent, that would be a stupid move. She went quiet, focusing every ounce of her energy on her reading. After a few minutes, she looked up, eyebrows scrunched. I only see the 4, she mumbled, worried I would yell at her again. There's no one else. So, either the villain has our 3 people grouped together, or those are his accomplices. I scowled. Do you mean it? What the hell? It's more likely to be our people, Lumillion piped up. If he has accomplices, I don't know why they would be separated from their boss. How far down? I asked. A few levels. Piving. And the 4th? I asked. She concentrated again. He appears to be 3 floors down in a large room within the northwest wing, she concluded. He's not moving, just sitting. Waiting, I said, more to myself than anyone else. I knew he would be expecting us, but the fact that he was just sitting there waiting sent chills down my spine. I became painfully aware of just how little we knew going into this mission. But he had forced our hand. We were playing a game that only he knew the rules to, and I hated it. I made sure that all eyes were on me before announcing the immediate plan. The general energy of the group felt tense. Everyone seemed to be on edge. That was going to be a problem if we didn't address it quickly. Here's what we're doing. I called out, just loud enough for the 3 squads to hear. Squads A and B are going to move into the bunker, while Squad C keeps an eye on the perimeter. Squad B will go for the victims. You'll follow Therma. Squad A will engage with the enemy. You're with me. A and B will remain here until C gives the all clear. Comms are for notifying the team of abnormalities or to confirm you've obtained your target. No unnecessary chatter. Therma, if the targets move, inform us. She nodded. I looked over our team one more time before signaling that Phase 2 of our mission had officially begun. Squad C moved immediately to begin their perimeter check. We had our birds in the air monitoring from the skies, but I felt it didn't hurt to have some extra assurance. The waiting was agonizing. Perimeter clear, a voice crackled through the comms. Proceed to next phase. Copy, I replied, then called out to the remaining squads, let's go. Things were pretty uneventful as we moved through the bunker. Getting in wasn't difficult, but whether he tried to make it hard for us or not, we came prepared with whatever we needed to get through armored thresholds and cement walls. Everything was quiet, aside from the sound of our footsteps echoing off the walls of the wide hallways. True to Therma's word, the place felt vacant. We didn't see a single living thing as we made our way through the first floor. It's eerie, Lemillion said at my shoulder. His whispers echoed loudly. Yeah, I replied, unsure what to make of it. We had come prepared for every scenario we could think of, but this was totally unexpected. The big guy was silent for a moment before picking up his pace and saying, I'm going on ahead. Hey, I called out, but he had already moved down to the level below us. Was he really that reckless? Now was not the time to go off on his own. But we had to follow him as quickly as we could. Without the ability to move through solid surfaces, we faced a challenge. We made it to the 3rd floor without any issues. It was then that Squad B split off to search for our captive heroes while my squad continued deeper into the 3rd floor. Other than some mindless wandering, he hasn't moved, Therma said before heading off for the victims. If you head south and stay towards the center of the floor, you should find him. My guess is he's in some kind of control room. Our 2 squads separated, mine following her lead. But it wasn't long before Ground Zero. I turned around just in time to see my squad before a reinforced barrier slammed shut, separating us. I set off a few explosions to break through the metal, but it was no use. The one with the ability to get us through the armored metal was down a few more floors to free the prisoners. I shouldn't have gotten so far ahead. I couldn't hear anything. The metal was scorched from my blasts but otherwise unscathed. These barriers were thick. I finally turned my back to the wall and resolved to move forward alone. I was more on guard now. The lack of obstacles had made me too relaxed. I continued forward, using everything I had learned about stealth operations. Memories from school surfaced. I remembered moving into situations with little regard for my safety. What did I care? As long as I came out on top, I didn't care what happened to me. I just refused to lose, even if winning meant getting injured. It took a while for me to realize I needed to be more cautious. I could do reckless things in school because it was all just training. I knew I was never going to die. But when Mr. Aizawa grabbed my shirt in 3rd year and punched me, he got his message across. Don't be stupid. Don't be reckless. Don't throw your life away just to say you were first. Grow esigero. Esigizasitarful. I held my earpiece firmly, trying to make sense of whoever was trying to reach out. The comms shouldn't have been malfunctioning. It didn't matter how thick the walls were, they should still relay clear communication, which meant someone was jamming it. I gripped my hair in frustration. Whatever my team was trying to warn me about didn't matter now. All I could do was move forward. I was doing just that when, out of the silence, someone screamed. I broke into a run toward the direction I thought I heard it from. I was pretty sure it was Lemillion. It made sense since he had moved ahead of me. The screams persisted, muffled as if the victim was trying to keep quiet but couldn't bear whatever they were enduring. I came to a halt at the end of a long hallway, where I was certain the screams were coming from. I probably should have been more careful to make the least noise possible, but the villain already knew I was coming. What did it matter anymore? But I needed to stop and think. Ground zero. Million shouted, obviously in pain. Get out of here and regroup. We can't, bang. The silence following the echoes of the gunshot was oppressive, pressing in on my eardrums like I was sinking deeper into water. My eyes started to get blurry, and I couldn't see in front of me. Instead of cement walls and floors illuminated by budget fluorescent tubing hanging from the ceiling, I saw a dark blur suddenly appear in front of me. Suddenly, and yet it was like everything was moving in slow motion. Within the blur, I could see a dark silhouette slowly pass in front of me, seemingly flying through the air. My vision cleared. My skin became clammy, and I slowly realized that I was quivering. Was I cold? I was scared. I could feel myself starting to hyperventilate, but I clapped a hand over my mouth. What was that? Stop it. Keep it together. Other people are counting on you. I worked to slow my breathing, inhaling through my nose and out through my mouth. I swallowed the lump in my throat and bit my hand, the sharp pain bringing me back to reality. My legs launched my body forward towards the doorway. Million annoyed me to bits, but he was a good guy and a good hero. If he was still alive, I wasn't going to let another good man die. Not alone. Not again. I stopped just inside the doorway, trying to register what I was looking at. Therma was right, it was some sort of control room. I could see a couple of electrical boards and consoles covered in buttons and dials. If I had to guess, more consoles like these extended to the back of the room. Ground zero. My attention snapped to the edge of where the hallway light extended, about 2 rows in, and centered in on Million. The dim lighting made it difficult to see him clearly, but I could tell that he'd been injured. He was looking at me from his vantage point on the cold, unforgiving floor. Aside from the BLD coming from a gash on the side of his head, he looked okay. So why the screaming? And if a gun went off, then where was it aimed? I ran to him and knelt on the ground to get a better assessment. He looked exhausted and was covered in sweat. Was he tortured? There was no evidence of it. I looked at the wound on his head and discovered that this was the result of the gunshot I had heard. He had been grazed by the bullet, slicing through his skin but not penetrating his skull. What happened? I whispered, though I'm not sure why I felt the need to be quiet. What's wrong with you? But before he could answer, another shot shattered the silence, and I suddenly felt Million's body slam into mine. Just like before, my vision blurred, and that dark silhouette was back, but this time, the moment it was square with my body, it flew back and hit me with enough power to knock the air from my lungs. The force of his body nearly made me fly backward. Instead, I lost my balance and landed HRD on the floor. I blinked a few times, then realized that this had also happened to me in real life. I could see Million's body pinning my legs. For a second, I was annoyed. He sure seemed to be taking his sweet time getting up. But my breath caught in my throat as I realized that the bullet had met its mark. A gaping hole in his back was haloed by an expanding ring of dark red. Oh God, I gasped. This couldn't be happening. What was going on? For a moment, all I could hear was my panicked breathing. Then, that was a rookie mistake. I froze, hearing this new voice and his accompanying footsteps draw closer to me. Of course. With gunshots came whoever was shooting the gun. There was always someone else in this room with us. So why was I so surprised to hear him speak? The new up-and-coming, he said. I expected more. I couldn't bring myself to look up or stop staring at the lifeless body laying across my legs. He was dead. He was dead, and it was my fault. And just like that, the same guilt I had worked so hard to forget came in full force to the forefront of my mind. Years of pain and regret coursed through my body like an internal hurricane trapped in a box that was much too small. He was dead, and it was my fault. I felt the weight of Million's corpse transfer from my lower body to the floor beside me. Slowly, I understood it was because someone had moved him. I focused my vision to take in what was going on and saw a polished shoe digging into the dead hero's side. Hey, I whispered weakly in protest. Don't, don't you dare touch him. Oh, don't suddenly pretend to care, he replied, his face still darkened by the lack of light. We both know that you don't. It took much too long, but the adrenaline finally caught up and I jumped to my feet. Now in a defensive position, I readied myself for combat. Don't you dare think you know what's going on in my head, I said fiercely. You don't know me. Oh, don't I? He asked. I could hear the amusement in his voice, as if he were watching a child throw a tantrum and trying not to laugh at how cute it was. Katsuki Bakugo, he stated. Hero name, Ground Zero. Quirk, explosion. You generate a nitroglycerin-like sweat and create sparks for controlled explosions. You like spicy food and your favorite color is? Yeah, and I like long walks on the beach too. Now who are you? I demanded, trying to regain control of the situation. What are you looking to accomplish here? I'm surprised that's your first question, he replied, his footsteps echoing as he moved across the room, far too relaxed for my comfort. I was acutely aware of the gun in his hand, and in the darkness, I struggled to track his movements. I would think you'd be wondering how your hero buddy here died, he continued. You shot him, I replied. It's not that complicated. Isn't it? He nearly laughed. That shouldn't have been a big deal for the big guy. His amusement was unsettling, as if he were in on a joke I couldn't grasp. Then it hit me, Lemillion's quirk was permeation. The bullets shouldn't have hit him. A wave of guilt washed over me as I realized he might have taken that bullet for me. But that didn't explain the first bullet that had grazed his head. There was nothing that should have prevented him from using his quirk. I'm shocked at how slow you are, the villain jeered. Honestly, I always thought you were quicker than this. If a single dead body can unsettle you this much, then you're in the wrong business, especially if you're looking to beat someone even half as good as me. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. Something had killed Lemillion in a way I didn't understand, but that didn't change the fact that he was dead. Bullets could kill me too, so it didn't matter. I raised my left hand and fired in the direction I guessed he was in. The flash illuminated the room for a split second, revealing consoles lining the walls and glass-fronted cabinets, many of which were empty. It was clear this facility was functional and had been recently used. But I registered all of this in an instant, but I still couldn't get a read on the villain. I hadn't even seen him. Did he have a quirk that made him invisible? Who was this guy? I could have argued that his quirk allowed him to read minds because, at that moment, he chuckled softly and said, "You're so confused, and it's so entertaining to watch." I couldn't just stand still and wait for him to come to me. I needed to act fast. I surveyed my surroundings, 6 paired rows of consoles with a path through the middle, 2 large metal exam tables near the back, and a heavy door on the left side, possibly an exit. As I walked, I spoke, "You gonna tell me why we're here?" My vision was adjusting after the flash, and I thought I could see a faint outline of a person in the left corner. "Sounds like you want me to monologue," he replied, confirming his location. I hate to disappoint, but we haven't gotten that far into the script yet. I raised my arms to fire some shots in his direction, desperate to land a hit. But before I could pull the trigger, something thick tightened around my right ankle and pulled my foot behind me. In one swift motion, my left foot was swept off the ground, forcing me to fall forward. My chest slammed against the concrete floor, knocking the breath from my lungs. As my right foot continued to be pulled upward, I scrambled for something to grip but found nothing. In an instant, I went from feeling some control to dangling from the ceiling by my foot. "Damn it!" I yelled in frustration. "Stop messing with me. Quit hiding in the shadows and face me." I reached up to loosen the noose around my ankle, but just before my hands made contact, another shot was fired. My thoughts spiraled away from my current reality, rushing into an alternate one. It was still dark, and I could feel myself sitting, having just fallen backward. A scream fought to escape from my throat. What did he have to do with anything? He didn't die from a gunshot wound. He died from jumping off. The same sinking feeling I got whenever I thought about his death overwhelmed my chest. I felt heavy with guilt, and all I wanted to do was cry. My thoughts snapped back to my present situation as excruciating pain tore through my right knee. The most recent shot I'd heard had found its target, and I was instantly incapacitated. My screams echoed off the barren concrete. I couldn't pull myself up to loosen the rope. I couldn't even stand to let myself hang there. The pain was unbearable. As my screams faded, I began to register the eerie click of dress shoes. I hadn't spent much time with this guy, but that sound made me shake. How could he have such an effect on me? Suddenly, the taut rope went slack, dropping me back on the floor. Frustration hit me. I had spent more time on the ground than on my own feet, and that frustration rivaled the pain shooting up and down my leg from the gunshot wound. And now my back. I had been dropped from about 10 feet. I was fortunate to have twisted enough to avoid landing on my head. What the hell? I gasped for air, unsure how many more hits my lungs could take. Things worsened when he was suddenly on top of me. With a knee on my chest, a foot digging into my injured knee, and a hand gripping my jaw, it was all I could do to not wish for death right then and there. How had he managed to put me through physical, psychological, and emotional torture all at once? "A coward, huh?" he whispered, his tone shifting from slightly amused to deadly. "Even your insults are weak." I saw an opening. It would have been simple to hook my good leg around his knee, grab his arm, and roll him onto his back. Painful but possible. Even a hit to his face could yield results. The only thing keeping me from acting was not knowing where his gun was and the fact that his sudden energy shift had me frozen in place. I mentally slapped myself. "You gotta get out of this. Get your act together." I slowed my breathing and resigned myself to being pinned to the ground, focusing on the enemy and acknowledging that my reckless mistakes had led me here. I needed more patience and a clearer mind. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to make good use of the situation. I needed answers. This chase you've had us on for months has raised a lot of questions, but that's the one I want answered the most. The others can wait. I was met with silence, only the sound of calm, steady breathing filling the void as he considered my question. I wished I could see his face. The most I could discern from the shadowed outline was his messy hair. Not being able to see him frustrated me again. "Are you after me?" I prodded, trying to spark conversation. "You set me up pretty well. I'm starting to feel like I've got a target painted on my back." "Don't be so vain," he replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "Had I hit a nerve?" "Why not?" I pressed. "Doesn't look like you had this much fun with Lemillion before taking him out. Why am I so special?" Silence again. Ground zero. My earpiece buzzed to life as my team restored communication. My heart swelled with pride. None of these guys were foolish, but I had worried about their ability to make progress without me or Lemillion there to guide them. Squad B successfully retrieved the 3 victims. They're unconscious but otherwise appear unharmed. Half their squad has joined ours, and we're headed your way now. Part of me wanted to tell them to stay away. We had grossly underestimated this guy. I had never believed a villain could work alone. No single person was so skilled that they could see every angle. But I had been reminded that I couldn't do much without my team. So I stayed silent. "I don't plan on killing you," he said, breaking the silence. "I'm not planning on killing anybody. Your buddy over there was the exception, but only because I made a promise. Killing people was never my intention." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Killing people was never his intention. How many had died because of him and his supposed experiments? "You gotta be kidding me," I whispered. He shook his head gently, signaling he was serious. "You taught me that killing people was a sign of weakness," he explained. "You march around with your threats and fake confidence, talking about how you're going to kill all your enemies. You fooled a lot of people into thinking you're strong, but I know better. It's just a face. A mask you use to hide how terrified you are of failure. You've beaten many villains, but not with your strength. Your primary tactic is to instill more fear in them than you feel yourself, to make them believe they're weaker than you are. And in my opinion, that makes you more of a coward than anyone." I wanted to be mad. I wanted to demand that he didn't know anything about me. Yet, he spoke to my greatest insecurities. How did he know all of this? Had he been watching me longer than I realized? "You don't know," I weakly choked. "What?" he scoffed. "I don't know you. It was amusing watching you trap yourself in denial, but now it's just annoying. Are you really so dense? What lies have you been telling yourself to feel better? He was almost shouting now. I could feel his anger and frustration brimming, about to spill over. But I didn't want that to happen. Normally, I would use a villain's unbridled emotions against them, but this time was different. If he lost his cool, his intentions to not harm people might change. I could hear several pairs of feet running in our direction. My team was coming, unaware of what they were jumping into. What should I do? How do I lead them? At this point, I didn't care about capturing this guy. I just wanted to get my team out of here. Moments before they burst into the room, I felt the weight disappear from my chest and the pressure shift on my knee, causing me pain. I paused to brace myself, then rolled onto my right side to try and stand. I still had one good leg, didn't I? But as I started to push myself up, the barrel of a gun was suddenly in my face. I never said you could move, the villain muttered. Without a word, I slowly shifted to a sitting position with my back against one of the consoles. I raised my hands in surrender. Please, I whispered. Just let me give the order for them to leave. His arms dropped to his sides in annoyed disappointment. Though his voice was too soft for me to hear clearly, I thought I heard him mutter, "So weak." The first few members of my team entered the control room at that moment. "Ground Zero." I heard one of them yell. "Get away from him," shouted another. I watched as he slowly set the gun on the nearest console and raised his hands in the air. That surprised us all. Was he really going to surrender? Was the size of our group enough to intimidate him? The rest of Squad A and those from Squad B that came with them filed into the room, all aiming various support items at him. But he stood completely still. My eyes had adjusted to the low lighting, making his movements easier to detect, but his face was still impossible to read. I could almost feel the demeaning smirk spreading across his face. With their backs to the meager light of the hallway, I couldn't see my team's faces either. But given the small gasps and whimpers I heard from a few of them, I knew they had discovered Lemillion's body. My heart ached again, knowing that I had allowed yet another person to die. My former classmate and now fellow hero, Ingenium, began advancing towards our target. His confidence was clear, but his movements were cautious. He wasn't making my same mistakes. "Villain," the hero started, but was immediately cut off by the man before him. "Are all you heroes so rude?" he asked, sounding bored. "You march around with your self-righteous attitudes, judging who's a villain and who's a hero." I didn't realize the line between good and bad was so well defined. "Are you trying to say that you shouldn't be regarded as a villain?" Ingenium replied, unfazed. "Even if we were to look at villain versus hero as a spectrum, with all the lives you've taken and people you've hurt, you would still be in the blackest of black." "Guilty as charged," he retorted, amused. "I'll consider that a confession, then," Ingenium replied, removing his helmet to see the target more clearly. "Call it whatever you like," the villain said, his voice taking on a deadly tone. I sensed everyone in the room take an unintentional step backward. Even Ingenium leaned back, sensing the shift. And then, before the hero could react, the villain's elbow crashed into Ingenium's cheekbone, and his foot wound around Ingenium's ankle. With a forceful shove, Ingenium fell backward, hitting the unforgiving concrete beneath him. From the looks of it, his head was spinning, but he was still conscious. Other heroes started to move forward, but in one quick motion, the villain snatched the gun he had left on the console, pet it, and pointed it at my face, all without taking his eyes off his adversaries. "Take another step and I'll kill him too," he threatened, his expression stone-faced yet sinister. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone absorbed the weight of his words. It was more than just a threat, it was a chilling admission of being Lemillion's killer. The silence thickened with emotion. When he was sure no one would dare to approach, he lowered his gun slightly and fired. I cried out in pain, feeling the impact as a bullet struck my left kneecap, joining the agony of the wound in my right knee. I grunted, fighting to suppress my screams, but tears streamed down my face. This pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I collapsed to my side, too weak to remain upright, losing BLD rapidly. My fists pounded the ground as I struggled against the fog clouding my mind. My team of heroes erupted in a collective cry of anger, rising to confront the villain, but he revealed another weapon. From his pocket, he produced a small device and pressed a button, activating an orb of sparking, neon green light. It expanded into a three-dimensional grid, enveloping the control room. As it surged toward the walls, every hero became ensnared in its tendrils, like victims caught in a spider's web. I felt the grid's energy hit me, forcing me down against the cold concrete. I lay sprawled on my back, realizing the grid held me captive while leaving some parts of me free. It was a small comfort, but we were still trapped. I attempted to turn my head but couldn't. I could hear my comrades struggling all around me, most pinned to the walls or the ground, their movements limited to hands and feet. "I take it I've got your attention now, yes," our captor remarked, his voice dripping with satisfaction. He leaned toward me, a condescending chuckle escaping him. "Now I will monologue." His delight in our predicament was evident. Everything had gone according to his plan. "You better release us or," Therma shouted, but was silenced by a hand over her mouth. Ah, the villain interrupted, shaking his finger in a mockingly parental manner. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "I've let you play your part, and you did it beautifully. Now it's my turn to say my lines. I practiced them in front of the mirror and everything. So do not interrupt." He paused, removing his hand from Therma's mouth, leaving her terrified and silent. This man was not insane, he was calculating. His movements were deliberate, each action purposeful. "I could bore you all with trivial reasons for my actions," he began, raising his voice to address us all, "but I'm sure you hear those daily from typical criminals. I could claim my motives are petty, like revenge. But that's so narrow-minded." He continued, "My reasoning can't be summed up in one word like most can. Revenge, money, power. Those are selfish and unsustainable. Their conviction is like a match. It flares up but dies down in seconds. Every villain's reason for evildoing is always selfish." Ingenium shouted from his position on the floor, only a few feet from me. The villain approached him, his shoes clicking against the concrete. "As I said," he replied, narrow-minded. "You may recall what I mentioned earlier, before I dealt with you. Defining good and bad isn't as simple as you think. If someone makes a mistake, are they evil? If they make 100 mistakes, are they a villain? Mistakes are accidents," Ingenium retorted through gritted teeth. "What makes someone a villain is that their actions are intentional. They make no attempts to change, they just move forward, trampling whoever is in their way." "A moving speech," the villain mocked. "But might you consider that what you perceive as villainy could actually be heroism? A man could push a child onto the sidewalk. His rough actions caused the child to suffer a broken arm, leading to ridicule for hurting another person. Yet his actions had actually saved the child from being hit by an oncoming vehicle. When others learned of his reasoning, they praised him for his heroism, despite having just condemned him for the same act." Silence filled the room. Ingenium was undoubtedly glaring at his adversary, but his intense gaze couldn't distract anyone from their shock. The man returned to the center of the room, folding his arms over his chest. He inhaled deeply before continuing. "Quirks," he stated. "I want to talk about those for a minute. A large part of the population possesses special powers or abilities that set them apart. These are registered with the government in an attempt to regulate them, though the effectiveness of this registry leaves much to be desired. You can't regulate a quirk just like you can't regulate hair color or someone's height. Not ethically, at least. So they sit back and watch as quirks combine and grow stronger, waiting until these stronger quirks can no longer be controlled. We're familiar with the quirk singularity theory," someone interjected. A moment of tense silence followed. "Yes, you're right," he responded with a small chuckle. "Stupid of me to waste precious time explaining something you already know. I'll move forward then, how about that?" He was met with silence. His chatty nature unsettled most of the heroes in the room. "As frightening as this theory is," he continued, "I honestly don't care that much about it. People argue about how best to regulate quirks to prevent the quirk singularity from happening. It's like watching wealthy individuals try to solve poverty without losing any of their riches. A sudden jolt shot through me. There's no way he could be considering something so drastic. It would be impossible. See, I don't really care about regulating quirks, he said plainly. I'm more interested in destroying them. Whether there was silence or gasps in response, I couldn't say. I was too preoccupied by my own internal dilemma. Destroy quirks. Even if it could be done. It was impossible. Quirks existed all over the world. It would be a futile effort to try to erase every single one. My colleagues echoed my thoughts. That's impossible, they shouted. There's no way to erase a quirk. It's embedded in a person's DNA. It can't be done. The man only laughed quietly at their reactions, offering no verbal response as they continued to shout angrily. Instead, he stood there, amused, as if watching a child throw a tantrum. Eventually, everyone quieted down. Only then did he continue. I wonder if anyone has figured out how this fun little trap of mine works. Or even thought about it. He asked, met with silence. No. What a surprise. Anyone have a guess? He patiently waited for a response, only to be met with more silence. He sighed with fake disappointment. Fine then, he said. I'll just tell you. This web is constructed using a very specific chemical, one that originates within each of you. It's a herm produced by the body that feeds a person's quirk, allowing it to grow stronger. It binds to the receptors of one's quirk factor, altering the body's nutrients to become compatible with the quirk system. The quirk factor then produces what we can call energy and sends it into the body's vasculature. This symbiotic relationship makes quirks possible, even exceptionally powerful ones. But the key is this herm that connects the BLD supply to the quirk factor. Without that connection, the quirk factor becomes useless, and by association, so does the quirk itself. My net that is keeping you immobilized is made with a synthetic version of that herm. Synthetic, but just as effective. And, when combined with some electricity, it can bond with every last one of your quirk receptors, pinning you against the nearest solid surface. Now close to me, he lazily kicked my foot and said in a quiet but menacing tone, I used a similar combination on the bullets that got your friend over there. Ingenium stated, I guess that would mean that you're quirkless, given that your net hasn't hindered your movements. In less than a second, everything around me went quiet. My mind went blank. I broke out into a cold sweat. The pain in my body disappeared, replaced by an expanding pit in my stomach. What he had said about his trap, the bullets, and killing Lemillion faded as I processed the newest harrowing discovery. This man was quirkless. That's right, he confirmed. I'm among the small percentage of people born without one. I wanted a quirk, but that didn't mean anything. I wanted one to help people, but that didn't matter either. All that mattered was that I didn't have one, and for some reason, others took that as a good enough reason to ridicule me. He was quirkless. No. This couldn't be real. It wasn't possible. If I could just push past that day, then I'd be able to see how ridiculous it was to even consider it. I already said that I wasn't in this for revenge, he continued, a bit more resigned. His words slowed to the point that each person in the room hung on every one of them. I meant that it would be easy to let myself get caught up in destroying the lives of those who tormented me, making me feel like a failure. It would be almost cathartic to ruin the futures of those that told me I'd be better off dead. He took slow, deliberate steps toward me. I was scared before, but now I didn't know what I was feeling. When he was close enough, he knelt down at my side and put his mouth right next to my ear to whisper, You're starting to realize it, right? Who I am. He then sat up and hovered over me, giving me a clear view of his face, illuminated by the net that gave off its eerie green light. For every freckle that spotted his skin, an effectual knife was run through my chest. Deku, I replied, nearly inaudibly as I forced the air past the lump in my throat. Tears sprang from the corners of my eyes. I sobbed openly. It's not possible. I choked. Deku is dead. He jumped off the roof of the school. Isn't that right? He whispered. Pretty graphic. Can you see it? Were you there after I hit the ground? After I was pronounced dead? I could see it. Those memories. The clouded sky, the pool of BLD, and the black covering. All of it came to the front of my mind, reigniting a flaming pain of regret that outclassed the physical pain racking my body. As I gasped for air on the ground, he left my side and got to his feet. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe, he declared, raising his voice. But I could hear it all. The screams of my classmates who never cared before. The wail of sirens. The principal confirming my identity. But the worst of it all, he continued, was when they wrote me off. No one even tried to save me. I mean, did anyone even check if I was still alive? At this point he was shouting. That breaking point I was trying so hard to avoid before was now seconds away from being compromised. But the anger I had expected was replaced with devastated sorrow. And pain. So much pain. He should have been crying. Deku always cried. This reality that I had constructed as a kid now had cracks spiderwebbing from the initial impact. Izuku's suicide. It had nearly broken me completely. But my reality stayed whole, even if it was damaged. I just covered it up with a sheet and ignored it, moving forward with my life. But here he was, throwing all of his weight behind a sledgehammer with every intention to shatter me. First, he was alive, and now, as stupid as it sounds, he wasn't crying. And it was wrecking me. I take it your friends don't know about your inspiring acts of altruism that you displayed growing up, do they? Deku continued, drenching his inflections in sarcasm. It didn't take him long to recover. He was back to his calm and collected self. Deku, maybe you'd like to fill them in. How about it? He asked. Then, with a dangerous bite in his tone, he added, Kaken. With that, my world shattered, and he was dancing on the shards. I didn't know what to say, let alone what I should do. I closed my eyes, leftover tears squeezing from the corners. I wasn't there when he died, but I knew that it was my words that pushed him over the edge. I'm sorry. For a moment, I thought he really heard me. His arms slowly dropped to his sides and his entire persona softened. No laugh, no scoff, no nothing. Just quiet. And in that moment, I thought I could recognize the Izuku that I used to know. It was brief though. It lasted for only a second before he stiffened again. Yeah, I bet you are, he shot back. It's easy to feel bad when you don't know if you'll live to see the morning. Ground Zero, one of the heroes said, a bit timidly. Naturally, none of the heroes wanted to aggravate the man who held the key to their lives at the moment. But I could understand if they wanted some answers. I doubt they had any idea what was going on. Sir, he said, do you know this man? Deku just looked at me, his head tilted slightly to the side, waiting for me to answer. Yes, I said after a long pause. We were friends as kids. What an odd way to say that you made every day a living hell for me, Kaken, Deku said. We were friends as kids. Sure, if friends made it their favorite pastime to hurt someone just because they were different. Isn't that what all friends do? Tell their pals that if they want a quirk so badly to just give up and hope for a better life next time. Because if it is, then yes. You were a great friend. He then looked at his audience, gestured to me, and said, a prodigious candidate for the hero profession, don't you think? He had stayed close by me since I'd recognized him. He would pace back and forth from my head to my feet and back, never straying far. But after his last comment, he started to walk away, closer to my team. A sudden strike of fear bolted through me as I wondered if he was going to hurt them. How'd you survive, anyway? I blurted out. You may have survived the fall, but without help, you couldn't have lived much longer, especially if you couldn't breathe. So how? It's not hard to establish a body, Kaken, he responded tersely, a hint of annoyance in his voice. I had gotten his attention. But your funeral, I continued. Someone would have noticed. He stopped abruptly, the hard sole of his shoe snapping against the concrete. I heard a sharp exhale before Deku spoke again. Sure, I'll bite, he said, obviously irritated. Granted, it's not something I was intending to cover, but fine. I'll indulge you. Since I was declared dead, I was put in a body bag and transported by a coroner. What no one knows is that, during the transport, the driver was stopped, torn from the driver's seat, killed, and replaced. I had passed out by then, from lack of oxygen. I would have died in that bag if it weren't for what had happened. Before the replacement driver continued to the morgue, someone else opened my bag and started to help me breathe. By the time we arrived, my color had come back. Of course, they couldn't just take me to the morgue since I was alive. Someone was bound to notice. But they couldn't just not deliver a body either. So, they took the body of the dead driver, used some quirk to change his appearance to look like mine, and then sent him off instead. That guy is the one sitting in my grave. It was a fake, I said to myself, horrified. Could say that, Deku answered, then with a smirk he said, though I doubt his family would appreciate it. I bet he was pretty real to them. And unlike my family, they didn't get a body to bury. Hell, I'd be surprised if they even knew he was dead. That's horrible, one of the heroes said. That poor family. Your mom, I said, sadness leaking into my voice. You were alive this whole time and you never said anything to her. Why should I? He asked, laughing. I mean, I may not think I've gone off the deep end, but I'm sure everyone else would. No, it's better for her to just believe that I'm dead. You don't think you're crazy? Ingenium piped up from his position on the ground. You're insane. I could hear the click of Deku's shoes as he slowly walked toward the hero. They made a distinctive scuff when he came to a sudden halt. Is that right? He asked, undoubtedly smiling. I'd ask why you thought so, but frankly, I don't care. Think what you want. From the corner of my eye, I could see the flash of his foot colliding with Ingenium's injured face. I'd be shocked if he were still conscious after that. Obviously, I was saved, Deku continued his story, but it was a long rehabilitation. Once my body was fixed, I had to relearn how to breathe on my own, how to eat on my own, how to walk and move on my own, everything. I couldn't even speak on my own. Instead, I would mumble and yell incoherently, trying to communicate. I spent several years just trying to be normal again. But despite the damage to my brain, my intelligence wasn't hindered whatsoever. So even though the connection between my body and my mind was fried, my brain was still very functional. At first, I just wanted them to let me die. I was depressed and had completely given up on any reason for living. But the man who had saved me would visit me every day and talk to me about the future. What did I want to accomplish when I was better? What did I want more than anything in this world, and how far was I willing to go to get it? He told me of his desires and his plans. I thought him to be narrow-minded, but who was I to judge? He was, after all, the only one who ever thought I was worth anything alive. So I decided that as I pursued my goal, I would help him towards his. Which is, one of the heroes asked, clearly invested in Deku's background story. World domination, he answered, matter-of-factly. Like I said, narrow-minded. And impossible at this point, considering he's dead now. What? How was someone with the power to save a kid from the brink of death? Shouldn't he have been able to save himself? Why did I even care? The BLD loss was really starting to mess me up. I wasn't thinking straight anymore. I was emotional. My breathing was becoming ragged and I could feel myself getting cold and clammy. Maybe making him talk wasn't such a good idea, but I didn't know anymore. I just wanted to get as many of my team out alive as I could. To answer what I'm sure you're thinking, Deku interrupted my thoughts. He was unable to save himself, but not due to any inability of his own. He had just served his purpose, so I killed him. I was going to be sick. Don't get me wrong, he continued, it's not like I murdered him. I just used him as an unwitting test subject. Turns out there was something about his quirk that had kept him alive for a long time. The guy was over 100 years old. And I suppose if he had kept living, he would have eventually gotten what he wanted. I just got what I wanted first. Which brings me to the ultimate endgame. A quirkless society. I want to bring things back to how they were before quirks got involved. Maybe then we can make more advances in science, government, the arts, things that actually matter for a growing world. Quirks never did much for us other than give people a power complex. His face hovered over mine in that moment, directing that last comment at me. And yet, where I expected anger, there was only sadness. Don't look down on me, I whispered, not wanting his pity. Case in point, he muttered to himself before walking away. A quirkless society. Deku shouted. but how to obtain it. Thus began years of study and research on the ins and outs of quirks. I thought at first my BLD was the key. I am quirkless after all. But that only spelled disaster when met with others who have quirks, as seen with the casualties at the cafe. I wondered if it was just the method of how a person came into contact with the serum. But that proved to be wrong too, though not as lethal as the first. I then changed my focus from how my body worked to how a quirk user's body did. Once I made the connection between the herm I told you about and how it affected the quirk factor, things progressed much faster. I obtained test subjects with vastly different quirks to test the efficacy of my theory and improve my experiments. Did my theory apply to all types of quirks? Quirks creating physical, psychological, even spatial effects. MD Lady, Bizawa, Uraraka. It made sense now why he chose those three. What had he done to them? Squad B said they were unconscious but unharmed. But was that actually true? I then turned to my mentor, the man who had saved me, Deku continued, pulling me from my thoughts. He had a very unique quirk. Where Shota Aizawa could temporarily block someone from using their quirk, my mentor had the power to completely remove someone's quirk factor. It wasn't just erased, it was gone. So, I began generating experimental serums using his BLD instead. And I finally found success. It turned my mentor's own quirk on himself and destroyed it, ultimately leading to his demise. Deku, you can't, I exclaimed. Destroying quirks will send society into chaos. Even if you could destroy every quirk in the world, you wouldn't be saving people in the end. If, he asked, now walking back into my line of sight. You misunderstand, Kaken. Yet again, you've roped me in with your assumptions and have assumed I haven't done anything yet. You think that I, like the rest, wanted to pull the trigger only after revealing my plans. Horror began to build inside me as I watched him approach an unassuming drawer beneath one of the consoles and remove a small case, no bigger than the palm of my hand. Though I couldn't see exactly what he was taking from the case, it became obvious to me that we had been too late. We had discovered footprints months after he'd put them there. This is how I know I'm not insane, he continued, flicking something hard in his hand. Those who have lost touch with the world. They can only comprehend the one thing they've always known. Themselves. They become natural narcissists, planning and executing in a way that puts themselves on a pedestal. They want to be noticed. They want to be worshipped. I just want people to be happy. Even the quirkless ones. He turned around, revealing a fully loaded syringe in his hand. It was small, but I felt a sickening sense that whatever it held was dangerous. I'd say don't move, Deku remarked, tilting his head as if talking to a child, but you can't. So, it doesn't really matter. He knelt by my side, placing his left hand on my forearm while drawing the syringe closer to my exposed skin. No. I screamed. Don't. The tip of the needle made contact, and I continued to shout, losing all sense of dignity as he slowly injected the liquid into my body. I expected it to burn or make me instantly sick, but I felt no different, just terrified. It took only a few seconds before he removed the needle and tossed it aside. I was left crying, wondering what he had done to me. He then sat back on his heels and patted my shoulder in false consolation. You won't feel a difference, he said. At least, not for a minute. It's a gradual process. What did you do to me? I gasped. Despite his words, I was already starting to feel tired. Fatigue crept into every part of me, making it hard to stay conscious. DMN, he chuckled. You probably get tired easily, don't you? You keep surprising me, Kaken. I never would have pegged you as someone who couldn't handle much. He stood up, crossing his arms over his chest. I was fighting to keep my eyes open. I gave you my serum, he answered. Give it a minute, and you'll be just as quirkless as me. No. Thermos screamed, making me jump. Just leave him alone. You've already done enough. Sorry, Deku shrugged, but it's already been done. Can't take it back now. You can already see the net losing its hold. Just as he pointed out, the fluorescent green web that had been pinning me to the floor was now fading, sinking through my body. Proving that what he claimed was true, there was nothing left for the net to bind to. He had successfully destroyed my quirk. All of my energy was gone. Between learning that Deku was alive and had become a villain, that he had made good on his promise to destroy quirks and had now taken mine, all of my life felt lost. I could move my limbs now if I wanted to, now that I wasn't being pinned to the ground. But what was the point anymore? Here's the nice thing, Deku said, his voice sounding somewhat distorted through the fog. It doesn't have to be injected. It's a fairly versatile serum. Granted, the injection takes effect much faster, but ingestion is just as effective, albeit slower. What do you mean, ingested? One of the heroes asked. I could almost feel Deku rolling his eyes. What I mean, he replied, annoyed, is that I've mass-produced this serum and tainted the water supply worldwide with it. It'll take some maintenance, of course. I sure would hate to get so close, only to miss a few and have quirks show up again in the future. But this way, everyone is exposed in one way or another. Drinking water, bath water, rivers, and lakes. No matter how someone makes contact, they'll be exposed. And after enough exposure, their quirk will also be destroyed. Just like my good friend Kaken's was. And it's likely that everyone here has already had their first encounter. The overall energy in the room had reached an all-time low. We couldn't stop it. We couldn't just cut off people's water supply. And just as he'd said, the deed was already done. He had taken all of the steps without any one of us catching on. He only exposed his plan after he knew he had already succeeded. As much as I'd love to stick around, Deku announced, I expect the ones that rescued your 3 captive heroes have now informed the rest of your friends of your current predicament and will likely be on their way to save you. So, I'll just leave this. He held up the small remote controlling the web we'd been caught in, right here for them to find. That way I can head out without any danger of you following me. Before doing so, he made one final trip to my side. Kneeling down for the last time, he gave me his signature coy smile and quietly laughed. Although, I guess you could try and follow me now, Kaken. But I'd like to see you try dragging your useless body across the floor after me. He stood up and turned away, then said, I guess I lied before. Maybe I was a little motivated by revenge. Then, with the ominous click of his dress shoes, we listened with dread as our intended target left the room. Once Deku left the bunker, it only took a few minutes before the rest of our team arrived to save us. At that point, I was as good as gone. The BLD loss was extreme. I passed out before the other heroes showed up and didn't wake up until I had been in the hospital for a few days. It was Ingenium who broke the news to me that Deku was never found. And since I was the one who led the mission, he felt it was best to leave reporting to the higher-ups to me. When it came to detailing what happened, I recounted our actions as heroes and nothing more. We got in, we saved the heroes, we had a less than productive altercation with the villain, he escaped, and that was that. Sure, I told them that his plan was to destroy quirks, but what was there to do about it? How were we supposed to prevent the entire world from using water? So I just shrugged my shoulders when they wanted to know how he planned to do it. There was no point in telling them. He had already won. But maybe that wasn't the whole reason. Maybe there was a fraction of me that might have agreed with Deku. I tried not to consider that, but it was hard to ignore. Maybe I was tired of the totem pole of quirk hierarchy. Tired of the constant fight between heroes and villains. Sure, as long as there were those using their power for evil, there would be those using their power to fight them. But the opposite was just as true. It didn't matter how many heroes existed. There would always be villains to rise against us. Maybe getting rid of quirks altogether would lighten the load. Which is the thought that dug me into a deep hole of depression. I felt useless. I was nothing without my quirk. And what's more, I had to sit and watch the world wonder why quirks were disappearing. The higher-ups had decided to not tell the public about what Deku had done, worried that it would cause more panic when nothing could be done about it. Just let the quirks fade away, they said. And though there was some chaos as people began to notice, it died down when they accepted it. Technology advanced quickly after that since some professions had previously depended on certain quirks to complete their work. General interests became more diverse now that the world wasn't focused on quirks. As much as I hated to admit it, what Deku did might have actually been a good thing. But so many died. So many were hurt. So, was it really? That's as far as I got on the subject before my brain started to hurt. There really was so much gray. It felt impossible to sort through it all to find some moral foundation without feeling like a hypocrite. As I wrestled with this internal struggle, I finally concluded, all we can ever do is our best. Treat people better. Make the world a better place to live in. Be better. And along the way, embrace your mistakes and let them propel you forward towards change. I sighed, feeling the weight of my thoughts. The world was so much easier before Deku. Colored leaves blew about in the air above me. I laid back on the grass with my hands behind my head, watching them fly, wondering what it must feel like. Fall had officially come. No more fake cold days immediately followed by sweltering heat. It was now safe to leave home in the morning with a sweater on without regretting it later that afternoon. There were more people holding their coffee close while wrapped in scarves as thick as a tree trunk. I used to hate the cold, but now I found it had grown on me. Still hated the snow. I had really grown to enjoy watching the leaves fall, especially on the college campus. Most of my time between classes was spent just relaxing outside and observing the progression of the trees through every season. It was almost cathartic. Since I didn't have any other options, I decided to give college a go. I felt ancient compared to the other students there, but I had a direction to run. That's all I needed. Just something. I was tired of only being known for my quirk and nothing else. Especially because now it didn't matter. I was in general classes at the moment. I just hoped that something would strike me as more exciting than my former occupation. Hey, Bakugo. I rolled my eyes in fake annoyance while trying to ignore that sickly sweet feeling in my gut. I set my face in a frown and pretended to ignore him walking up to me. Come on, man, he said. You're not tricking me with that stupid scowl. In fact, I'm offended you think it would still work. What do you want, shitty hair? I grumbled, opening my eyes. I didn't expect his face to be right above me. His beaming smile forced his eyes shut. My own eyes widened in surprise, and a small gasp escaped my throat. He laughed. To hang out, of course. Silence reigned supreme as I tried to regain control of my racing heart. I tried to cover up my surprise by sitting up and shoving his face out of view. This only made him laugh more. Fine, I huffed. Do whatever you want. I have to leave soon anyway. For real, he responded, his smile falling a bit. I always seem to catch you at the worst times. The sadness in his voice started to make me panic. Boys, did he really freak me out that much? I was so stupid. Well, I said, trying to recover. I mean, we could maybe hang out later. If you've got the time, that is. I avoided looking at him, worried that he would notice how hard I was blushing. I even tried scratching the back of my head so that my arm would cover my face. He stood up straight and aggressively fist-bumped the air with a shout of victory. Ah yeah, he proclaimed. I'm so there. Text me when you get home, Kay. Without even waiting for me to reply, he darted off with a wave, heading to the library. What had I just gotten myself into? Well, I was committed now. I grabbed my forearm crutches and used them to help me stand. After swinging my backpack over my shoulders, I started to hobble to my next class. He looks nice. I froze at the sound of the new voice. The chill of the outside air was nothing compared to what had just traveled down my spine in that moment. But instead of being baited, I decided to just keep walking. You're going to ignore me? He asked. I guess that's fair, considering I'm pretty sure I'm the one who put you in those crutches. That got me to stop. I turned around partway and scowled at that green-haired guy. Pretty sure. I growled. You blew my knees out. Really? Deku replied, looking to the side with his eyebrows furrowed, as if he were struggling to remember one of the worst days of my life. Then his eyes went wide, and he threw his head back and laughed. That's right, he exclaimed, I did. Wow, I'd forgotten that that's what happened. I figured I had to have done something. I was fuming. It would have been no surprise if smoke was rising from the top of my head. I came closer to him and stuck the end of one of my crutches in his chest. He looked directly at me with that stupid coy smile of his. You're full of it, you know that. I shot out. I hate you. Then I turned around and walked away. I'm not surprised, he replied to my back. Honestly, if you didn't, I would consider you a saint. It didn't take him long to catch up with me. It's not like I was very fast. Still, it annoyed me. What are you doing here? I asked angrily. You following me? Just as vain as ever, aren't you? He replied with a chuckle. No, I'm not following you. This was a mere coincidence. It turns out my wife attends your same university, and I was just, hang on, I spat, stopping him with one of my crutches. You're what? My wife, he said with a small laugh. I got married earlier this year. I would have invited you, but, bad history. Who in their right mind would marry you? I shouted. That's not very nice, he replied, feigning hurt. Are you being serious right now? No, not really, he shrugged. Like I said, I understand why you hate me. Then why did you even say anything? I asked, facing him. You could have just let me go on my way, and my day would have gone on, unruined. I guess, he said, I just wanted to see how you were doing. His sincerity caught me off guard. You wanted to see how I was doing, I slowly repeated. He nodded. I can't say that I ever really understood Deku when we were kids. I didn't understand why someone so weak wanted to have such a dangerous career. I never understood why he was so determined to follow me around, even when I treated him poorly. And I especially didn't understand why what I thought mattered to him. Now I was surprised. For the first time ever, I felt like I knew what was going through his head. He gave a small smile and a gentle nod, clearly satisfied with that answer. I'm glad to hear it, he responded. I know what I did made it harder for you to move forward. I'm sorry about that. Which part? I asked. My knees or my quirk? He chuckled at the ground. Your knees, he answered. I'm not sorry about your quirk. Figures, I replied, less angry than I thought I'd be. Destroying my quirk did make things difficult. Rehab was tough, and aside from what the Hero Commission was willing to give me, I had no income. My parents helped me out a lot during that time, and I hated it. I was deeply depressed and often considered giving up. I had every right to be furious with Deku. But I wasn't. I think some of his reasons behind what he did were valid. Our world had come to depend on quirks in an unhealthy way, and many were changed by them, myself included. It didn't make what he did right, but it helped me understand him better. I had thought about that day more than I realized. I hope you keep doing good, Kaken, he said. I know I had nothing to do with your present happiness, but I'm glad you have it. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I blamed him for a lot of my hardships, but I couldn't say that I hated him. Maybe I'd grown up. Or maybe I was just tired of hating him. He nodded back and turned to leave. But before he went too far, I called out to him. When he turned around. If things had been different, you would have made a good hero. He smiled. A genuine smile. The kind of smile I remembered he had as a kid. Then he turned back around and walked away. Katsuki, honey. I felt a gentle squeeze on my shoulder. I swung my arm in a half-hearted attempt to ward off whoever was trying to interrupt my sleep. Katsuki, the woman tried again. Wake up. Your teacher called. He's awake. I opened my eyes, totally confused. My teacher? What teacher? Who was awake? And what was my mom doing in my room? Mom. I croaked. I tried clearing my throat and slowly sat up in my bed. My room was dark, the only light spilling through my open door from the hallway. What I didn't understand was what I was doing home. Not in my apartment, but in my parents' house. Why was I there? What's going on? I said a little louder. I saw my mom's face fall, sad but also full of understanding. You've been asleep for a few hours, but I'm sure you're still exhausted. You've had a long night, she started. But I figured you'd want to know as soon as he woke up. As soon as who woke up? Izuku, honey, she answered gently. He was in surgery for a while, but he's been sleeping off the anesthetic. Mr. Aizawa just called to say he's awake. Suddenly, everything came rushing back. The train station. We'd been waiting for the train home. It had been delayed, so we were the only ones left at the terminal since it was so late at night. I was tired and irritated. And then Izuku started talking. Man, today was exhausting, Izuku stated, referring to that day's hero training. He was right, but I wasn't going to admit that. Shut up, that. Nobody cares, I groaned. I slouched on the bench and tilted my head back. With any luck, I could get some sleep before the train arrived. Oh, sorry, he mumbled. If you want, I'll just stand, and you can lay down on the entire bench. That way you can sleep. Leave me alone, I muttered, not really hearing what he said. Yeah, okay, he said quietly. We sat in silence for a few minutes before he decided he'd been quiet long enough. Hey, Kaken. What? Sorry, he squeaked. I was just wondering if… Look, I'm gonna stop you there, I interrupted, sitting up and opening my eyes to glare at him. I'm not interested in having a conversation with you, especially right now. So just keep it to yourself, got it? He furrowed his eyebrows, not breaking eye contact. I recognized that face. So annoying. It didn't matter what I said, he was determined to say whatever was on his mind. Fine, I grumbled, slouching back on the bench again. Just make it quick. I will, he perked up. Then he launched into his hero analysis at top speed. Between how fast he was talking and how he mostly just muttered to himself, I really only caught every few words. It's just, you've had more experience with training your quirk. And I was wondering if you had any ideas on how I could make mine stronger. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me shooting lasers at his face. Fear flashed across his expression, and he gulped down his words. I sat up straight, looking down at him with my hands clenched into fists, realizing I was shaking. If you think, I whispered dangerously, that I'm going to help you with your quirk, then you've got another thing coming, Deku. I spat my words out like venom. All his excitement faded in that instant. He looked down at his wringing hands. I turned away from him, but the adrenaline in my system had woken me up completely. What happened, Kaken? He asked timidly. I froze, considering whether his words were enough to justify a punch. I mean, he continued, it used to be that you were always there to help me. I knew I could count on you, even if you were never very nice. I've accepted that as part of who you are. But you changed in middle school. Instead of proving your strength by helping people, you decided to make them fear you. That's when you really got mean. How do you expect to be a good hero if that's how you treat people? I whipped around and grabbed him by the collar, yanking him close. I will be the greatest hero to have ever lived, I whispered slowly. So you just shut up with your opinion. Nothing that comes out of your mouth is worth anything, Deku. Don't forget that. When I released him, he fell hard onto the cement floor. I hadn't realized I had pulled him out of his seat, and I didn't care. I stood up and stuffed my hands in my pockets, walking away from the bench. Deku sat on the ground, probably in shock. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. Turns out we weren't alone in the terminal after all. Kaken. The adrenaline had worn off, and I was exhausted. It took too long to recognize the firearm in the stranger's hand, pointed directly at me. I was slow to react when the gunshot rang out. Everything moved slowly, but I was slower. I just stared at the bullet as it flew toward my chest, unable to move. Then a shadow blocked my view. Just as quickly, that shadow hit me square in the chest, knocking me to the ground. Confused, I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. Deku! I shouted, time still moving too slowly. He had fallen onto his side, gripping his midsection. He convulsed, coughing up blood. His breath shook as he turned to look at me, eyes widening in fear. He relaxed a little, gave me a small smile, then collapsed. Deku! I screamed again. Oh God, hang on. Just hang on. I scrambled to my feet and darted to my bag by the bench. After digging for what felt like forever, I found my phone. I called for help while rushing back to his side, stripping off my uniform jacket to press against his wound in a weak attempt to stop the bleeding. There was so much. Panic set in as I almost forgot about the gunman, who slowly walked up and stopped in front of me. I faced him, realizing he was a total stranger. Whoops, wrong guy, he whispered, then turned and walked away. Rage boiled inside me at his casual dismissal. Wrong guy. Was he serious? Part of me wanted to go after him, but I was pulled back to reality when Izuku coughed up more blood. The voice on the phone was calling out to me since I had stopped answering her questions. Please, just hurry. I cried into the phone, blinking through tears to focus on Izuku's face. He stared at the ceiling, blinking hard to stay conscious. As I begged for help, I felt a warm but tight squeeze on my arm. "It's okay, Kaken," he said with a shaky voice. "I'll be okay. Don't worry, alright? You don't need to worry about me. I'll be fine." With every word, he became more breathless, and by the time he finished, his eyes were closed. He'd passed out. "No, stay awake." I cried out. "Don't go to sleep. Izuku." I hated myself for the tears I cried, but I hated myself more for feeling so helpless. So slow. If I had been faster, better, then this wouldn't have happened. This was my fault. He was going to die, and it would be my fault. His words came back in a distorted haze. "How do you expect to be a good hero if that's how you treat people?" The medics arrived, and in seconds he was loaded onto a stretcher and taken away. The officers tended to me and called my parents, who met us at the police station. I had long since wiped my tears away and now only stared at the floor. I didn't speak. I barely thought. I just sat in silence. Mom and Dad took me home. I started a shower to wash the blood off my hands and put my clothes in the washer while the water got hot. Once I got in, I just stood under the shower head, hot water cascading down my face, and continued to stare at the floor. Then I heard a knock at the bathroom door. "Katsuki, are you hungry?" my mom asked gently. For some reason, that snapped me out of my comatose state. The tears started up again, and my knees went weak. I knelt on the shower floor and pressed the heel of my palms into my eyes, clasping my mouth shut to stifle any sound. I didn't want anyone to hear me cry. No one ever had. No one but Deku. It was nearly 3 in the morning when I started running. My dad had offered to drive me, but I needed time to think. I needed to run off the adrenaline. As soon as Mom had woken me up and reality dawned on me, I got dressed and started towards the hospital. It was warm outside, even that early in the morning. I was sweating from the humidity and exercise. It had been a dream. Deku's suicide and subsequent actions, him destroying Quirks, being the greatest villain I had ever encountered. But it had felt so real. I was glad that it hadn't been. Villain Deku was way worse than not villain Deku. My whole life, I had continuously put him down, trying to get him to give up on his dream of becoming a hero. I had done everything without a single thought that at any point he could have snapped. To be honest, I didn't think he had it in him. He'd always been good. Never selfish. Never unkind. Never like me. Thinking about how real it felt, seeing his body on the ground in front of the junior high, with the black plastic covering draped over him, forced me to stop. My steps slowed until I reached the corner of the street. The hospital wasn't much further. Would everything have played out like it had in my dream? If he really had tried to take his life, would he have survived? Would he have pursued that path? Would Izuku Midoriya have died and been replaced by the empty shell I saw? Would my quirk have been destroyed? I leaned my back against the brick wall of the corner store I stood by. The details of the dream rushed back to me in full force. I was starting to feel overwhelmed. I had been so self-centered. I wasn't concerned for anyone, always looking out for number one. I only cared about me and my life. My dreams. My goals. Nobody else mattered. Deku's words came back to me. If that's how I behaved, how did I expect to be a good hero? I stared at my hands as his voice ricocheted through my head. What good is having the quirk I've got if I can't even save people? How did I plan on saving people if I was making them feel like they were better off dead? I was starting to feel like this quirk was wasted on me. I never should have gotten a quirk. I didn't deserve one. Deku did. Deku was the hero, not me. I shook my head in frustration. It was just a dream. None of it had been real. There was no point in getting caught up in the what-ifs. People lost their minds over that. All there was to do was move forward. Leave it behind. But I couldn't help but feel like I was supposed to remember it. Every detail of that dream was important and should never be forgotten. The obvious takeaway was not to tell Deku to harm himself. Then I remembered his voice. He hadn't been an empty shell of the Izuku I had known. He was the same. But instead of being filled with hope and determination, it had been replaced with sorrow and pain. I could still hear the inflections in his tone, the hurt that saturated every one of his words as he revealed his feelings about being abandoned when he needed someone the most. I could have been there. I could have been better. I could have saved him. But I wasn't there, and I hadn't even tried to save him. No one had. And that point he made very clear. We had failed him. More importantly, I had failed him. No more. I already knew how to use my quirk to always come out on top, to win. Now I needed to focus on using it to save. I refused to waste another minute being a half-hearted hero. I sprinted through the hospital doors. It was quiet, and I startled the night nurse sitting at her station with my abrupt arrival. With all the noise that had been present inside my head, the sudden silence was a little unsettling. I figured it wouldn't take you long. I turned to my left, and there sat my teacher, but not the one that I had expected. He looked out of place with his massive body sitting in a chair for normal-sized humans. All Might, I said. Technically you're not allowed to be here, he continued, standing up from his seat and walking towards where I stood. He towered over me. Visiting hours don't start until 10. But I guess that you wouldn't want anyone knowing you showed up. He stood there, looking down at me. No pity. Just a little concerned. What are you doing here? His mother called me and I came, he answered simply, shuffling a bit and putting his hands in his pockets. What? So you're making house calls to students now? I said, sarcastically. His connection to Izuku had started to get my attention. I mean, I know Izuku was a fan, but so was everyone. What made him so special? I continued to stare at All Might, a bit skeptically, when he gestured with his head to one of the hospital's many hallways. He's 3 doors down and to your left. I stood there for a minute, wondering if I should press him further, but ultimately decided against it. I jammed my fists into my pockets and started walking in the direction he'd pointed. My speed unintentionally slowed as I got closer to Izuku's room and my palms started to sweat. Was I seriously nervous? Ridiculous. But before I could brush it off completely, I wondered if I really was. Was I afraid I'd walk in and he would be that decisive and cold version of him I had just dreamt about? Or maybe I was worried that he would be mad at me. I didn't think I would care, but as I thought more about it, I began to realize his opinion of me mattered a lot, and the fear of him hating me was making my resolve weaken. My fist was inches from the door, ready to knock. But I was frozen. Why couldn't I move? I panicked. Was I really that scared? Yes, I was. I let my hand fall and turned away from the door. If Izuku hated me, then fine. But I didn't want to know. I didn't want to face him. Then I heard the click of the door handle, soft footsteps, and then the slow closing of the door. I turned around to see who had been in Izuku's room and was met with the now surprised expression of his mom, Inko. Katsuki, she said quietly, almost in a whisper. I didn't expect you so soon. I thought you might wait until morning. As she spoke, she came towards me and pulled me in for a hug. Her head didn't even reach my shoulders. I wondered absently about Izuku's height. He wasn't exactly tall, but I kind of expected him to be a lot shorter, like his mom. His dad must be tall, I thought absently. Though I wouldn't really know. I'd never met the guy. Yeah, I responded, scratching the back of my head with my free hand. My mom said Mr. Aizawa had called to say he was awake. I guess I didn't really think about the time. I'll just come back later. Nonsense, she declared, though still in that whispered tone. This would be a good time. He's awake and I was just headed home to grab a couple things for him while he's in the hospital. I'm starting to wonder if they have any storage space available since he seems to be here more often than not. She laughed at her joke. I just gave a half smile and absently nodded. I hadn't noticed how long the silence had gone until she broke it. Though now when I met her eyes, she had turned much more serious. It was never a mystery to me where Izuku got his intense expression. The one he got when he was dead set on something and there was no talking him out of it. I saw that expression more and more these days. Katsuki, she said, demanding my attention. Her intensity made me feel like I had to swallow my nerves down. Yes, ma'am, I said, trying to maintain my confidence and failing. I know you don't want to hear this, she started, and you may never accept it. But what Izuku did, he didn't do it to be heroic. He did it for you. I looked away and scowled. He would have done it for anyone. That may be true, she continued, but I think you and I can agree that you're one of the very few people in his life that has given him a reason not to. My shoulders sank and my eyes dropped to my feet. I knew that what she said was true, but that didn't make hearing it any easier. I felt a gentle touch softly squeezing my arm, making me think instantly of that moment. That moment when Izuku had done the same thing, reassuring me that he would be fine and to not worry. I pushed it from my mind and looked up. Her intense expression was gone and replaced with one of kindness and warmth. My point is that no matter how loud you shout or how hard you hit, there is nothing you can do that will push him so far away that he stops caring about you. Tears pricked my eyes, threatening to spill over for the millionth time. Seriously, how much had I cried in the last few hours alone? For fear of losing it completely, I didn't say anything, but just nodded. She gave me a small smile, another gentle squeeze, and then started down the hall towards the exit. How did she know? How could she have possibly known that those were the words I wanted to hear? That I needed to hear? To someone else, it may have sounded like the go-ahead to treat Izuku however I wanted to. But to me, it meant something different. It meant that no matter how much I messed up, he'd still be there. I had kept many of my friends at arm's length, not wanting anyone to get too close. That made me vulnerable and them a liability. It surprised me to realize that Izuku was the sole exception. Even when I tried to push him away, he kept coming back. Part of me found that reassuring, so I only half-heartedly tried to distance myself. He was right about junior high, though. Something happened that made me think he was my enemy. What happened? Did I still feel that way? Could I change it? Without really thinking, I opened the door to Izuku's room and stepped in. The lights were off except for the lamp next to his bed. I wondered if he had fallen back asleep since his eyes were closed. But when I shut the door, I turned to see him squinting as his eyes adjusted to the light. When he recognized me, his mouth stretched into a huge smile. "Kaken," he called quietly, his voice a little rough from lack of use. "Hey, Deku," I replied, slowly making my way to the side of his bed. Then I awkwardly added, "How are you feeling?" "Oh, I'm fine," he shrugged. I rolled my eyes. "You got shot and you're fine." "Sure," he chuckled. "I mean, I'm a bit sore, but it's not too bad. What about you?" "What do you mean, what about me?" "Well," he mumbled, sensing he had said something to offend me, "I just wanted to see how you were doing." A small gasp escaped my throat, and suddenly that scene from my dream unfolded in my mind. That fall day with the blowing leaves, and Izuku showing up after so long, just to check on me. He smiled and sighed, closing his eyes. "Thank goodness," he whispered. "I'm really glad you're okay." We sat in silence for several minutes. While he rested his eyes, I noticed his bandages for the first time, and that familiar sinking feeling of guilt returned to my gut. "Why?" I whispered to myself, but he heard. "Why what?" he asked. I looked up at him, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Why do you even care? Don't you remember everything I said to you? Before that guy showed up, I was a total JRK, and you're wondering if I'm okay." He was stunned into silence. He really hadn't thought about it, had he? Everything I had ever said to him hadn't crossed his mind when he jumped in front of me. Was that what Inko meant when she said he'd done it for me? Maybe for anyone else, he would have done it because why wouldn't he? He was supposed to be a hero, so of course he would jump. But I didn't deserve that same courtesy, did I? Did it even cross his mind to act heroically despite everything I had said? Or did he just jump because it was me? "I don't really know how to answer that," he replied slowly. "At least, not in a way that won't get me yelled at." I slumped into one of the chairs, feeling defeated. I was so confused. His moral compass was so different from mine, it felt foreign. But it was genuine. And I hated it. I hated feeling this way. So lost and confused. Vulnerable. "Whatever," I said in frustration. "Just don't do it again, got it? All you ever do anymore is worry your mom sick. So don't pull any stunts like that again, clear?" He was quiet, mulling over my words. I watched as he took a deep breath and looked up at me. I instinctively backed up a little at the look he was giving me. It was that same intense expression I had seen on his mother earlier. But now there was something else about it. Something serious. You know better than to ask that of me, Kaken, he said resolutely. You know that if your life is in danger, I'll do whatever it takes to bring you home. So make whatever demands you want to feel better about yourself. But at the end of the day, it won't change a thing. Pro-hero Bidmed. Despite it all, you've been with me my whole life, and you're a big reason why I kept my resolve to be a hero, no matter what. And now that I have the ability to protect people, I will protect you. Because. His words slowed and became softer. In a way, you were always trying to protect me. Seriously? I scoffed. I beat you up. I told you that you were worthless. I stand by what I said, he replied with renewed determination. Sure, you became a real JRK in junior high, but even then I saw right through you. Don't think I didn't notice. There were plenty of others in our class who wanted to be heroes and didn't have the quirks to do it. But I never saw you trying to keep them from pursuing their dreams. Just me. In a weird, twisted way, you really were just trying to protect me, Kaken. You didn't want me to get hurt, or worse. I know you better than anyone, and I know that you are strong enough to protect anyone. So do it. Be a hero. Protect people. But know that while you're doing that, I'll be protecting you. And there's not a thing you can do about it. Inko's words echoed in my mind. There really wasn't anything I could do to push him away. No matter how hard I tried to keep him at arm's length, he would fight me. I could see it in his eyes, just daring me to try. In that moment, I realized something important. I couldn't ever remember someone looking at me that way, aside from my parents. It was a look that convinced me that no matter how badly I messed up, I was still worth saving. Whatever, I grumbled, turning to the door to leave. Do what you want. You'll get bored trying to protect someone who doesn't need it. So waste your time. See if I care. Before I closed the door, I thought I heard him chuckle and say, Sure, Kaken. Sure. Even in those simple words, I felt comforted because I knew Izuku had my back. And he wasn't going anywhere.